Lauren, you're on mute. It didn't come through.
Aaron Ryder, Columbus.
No.
I heard Aaron just fine, but Lauren's not coming through correctly.
Right. She's was talking, but no.
I think you're, Lauren, I think your mic maybe. That was my echo, sorry.
Can Lauren Hill hear us?
Me.
I guess in the meantime, Sheila Kemis, commission support staff.
Okay, I can jump in. This is Brad Loveless, secretary.
Miller, assistant secretary, and Pratt.
Chris Tymason, legal counsel.
Okay. Do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda, Sheila?
No changes.
All right. Then let's move towards the September 24th minutes. Are there any additions or correction to the minutes? Well, then I'd like a motion that they be approved by somebody.
Move to approve September 24th meeting minutes.
Second.
Okay. Did you get who those were, Sheila? Okay. This is Gerald Lauber again. At this point, we encourage and offer up time for public comment on non-agenda items. And is there anyone who has public comment? And if you do have, please state your name and where you're from. Is there any public comment on anything we're not going to cover on the agenda?
And to do public comment, please use the raise hand function or in the chat directly towards me. And I see you, Margaret. I'll unmute you.
Oh, okay. They need
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, I sent this statement to you yesterday, and I'm Margaret Cremar, and I live halfway between Topeka and Lawrence, just north of Big Springs, which isn't on the map, so our mailing address is Lecompton. Okay. This matter came to my attention because for the month of November, our book group read Coyote America by Dan Flores. We learned that coyotes are a much maligned, persecuted species that has been needlessly slaughtered by the hundreds of thousands throughout American history. Then, as coincidence would have it, I learned within the next few days from a news source that at their August 2020 meeting, the commissioners of the Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism approved a resolution allowing coyotes to be hunted at night with lights and thermal imaging equipment. I personally oppose the killing of coyotes for any reason, because studies have established that their slaughter increases rather than decreases their numbers, because they've established that if the populations are being decimated, the females have many more pups. This Dan Flores said that in a stable population, they'll have 2 or 3 pups. In a population that's being decimated, they'll actually have as many as 20. As a pet and livestock owner, I also know that keeping animals safe is my responsibility. However, I am realistic enough to realize that the hunting of coyotes is not going to stop anytime soon. That is why I am specifically targeting hunting at night with lights and thermal imaging equipment, a cruel and inhumane practice that eliminates any fairness from the sport of hunting. And if we look around, at the young climate activists who are the wave of the future, they are not participating so much in the hunting and trapping traditions of their fathers and grandfathers. There's coming more and more a holistic view that every living thing plays an important role in a healthy ecosystem. So I would encourage you to tune more into that message, and at the very least, please reverse the regulation of hunting at night, coyotes at night, with lights and thermal imaging equipment, a practice that many Kansans would find cruel, inhumane, and appalling. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Margaret. Does anybody else have first of all, any questions, or is there any for Margaret?
Would one of you share what she sent to you with me, please?
I sent this statement to each of the commissioners
Okay,
in writing because I was terrified that the Zoom was going to crash, or
Okay.
the screen goes crazy or whatever. And so each of them should have the statement.
okay.
I-
If one of you would send it to me, I appreciate that.
I'll forward it to you, Sheila. This is Gerald.
Thank you.
The only comment I have is 20 pups is a serious litter. There you have it. Does anybody else have any questions? Well, thank you, Margaret. We take what you say and pay attention to it. Is there any other general public comment on non-agenda items today?
Doesn't look like it.
All right. Well, I'm going to hit one, and it doesn't need to have a lot of time spent on it. Last weekend was the opening weekend of duck season in the southeast zone. And I received some comment from some constituents because I own property down there. They're trying to, I have been asked why the season starts so late, and then conversely, why so much emphasis is placed on the tail end of the permissible duck season, which so much of the water is being iced up. We've had this discussion many times, but to somebody that asks it for the first time, it's not an easy thing to always answer. And I think in the future, and starting next year, we can't do anything this year. I think we really need to reconsider having a little earlier opener. You've got the best weather. I take my grandson with me. He's too young to shoot. But if the ducks were there late, he can't go. It's too cold. It's frozen up. And I think we're missing a recruitment opportunity. And I'm not talking about a lot of extra time. And I know staff has generally approved and recommended an earlier opening, but I think we really need to look at it hard again, because I think we're missing the boat. And it's frankly difficult for me to explain to certain constituents who don't hunt in the extreme southeast part and have ice eaters and equipment and duck clubs. It's difficult for me to explain to them why that type of hunting appears to get the preference. So I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts. Brad, I see you raise your hand.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Brad Lovelace. I've heard some of the same comments. In fact, I was talking to our managers over the Neosho area, which is in southeast Kansas. And 2 weeks ago, we had a little cold snap, if you recall, and at that time they had over 200,000 waterfowl on their wildlife area. And so that kind of rekindled the conversation amongst us about, are we missing an opportunity for the public to get in, because the season at that point was still going to be closed for a couple more weeks. And they were saying, boy, we wish we could get the public in here, use some of these, to benefit from some of the resource here. So I think that's a worthwhile conversation, and we'll look forward to having that with you.
All right. Does anybody else have any comments on that?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Spore. The early cold snap that we had pushed birds down, way earlier than we would normally have them. This is the first year of opening day or opening weekend duck season when there were actually ducks in the area to hunt. I think we've got the seasons set the way they should be, but when you get an earlier cold front like that, ducks do come down earlier and you miss out. I guess I could remind people of, after January 1st, when there's more ducks here and the season's closed and we don't have an opportunity to hunt them. So it goes both ways. Thank you.
Anecdotally, that cold snap pushed the wood ducks out early. Usually they'll hang around a little bit longer. Anyway, that's something I think we need to discuss. So, is there any other public comment on non-agenda items?
We had one come in right as you start talking, Commissioner, in Stephanie, I can't pronounce her last name, sorry. I will unmute you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Stephanie Valayan, and I am a 13-year-old living in Washington. Fur trappers and predator-killing programs have already pushed American wolverines to the edge of extinction. And now, as their snowy habitat disappears in our warming world, so do the wolverines. As few as 300 American wolverines remain in the lower 48 states, and despite the serious threats to their survival, wolverines have once again been denied Endangered Species Act protection. The American wolverine could disappear from every state save Alaska if we don't act fast. It's only a matter of time. And wolverines aren't the only ones in danger. Right now, there are no gray wolves in Kansas. You need to start helping them recover, because with the most recent decision to remove gray wolves from the endangered species list, their numbers will only decrease. This vulnerable wolf species could be eradicated from this country by the end of the year. And what makes wolf killings even more horrific is that wolves are familial animals. They usually live in packs of up to 30 individuals, many of which likely have families and young to take care of. Members of a wolf pack are one big family, and for animals such as wolves, hunting can devastate entire communities. Mother wolves especially form strong and inseparable bonds with their cubs, and when they are killed, their orphan cubs are left all alone with no one that close to love or care for them. Yet we continue to kill their mothers and their relatives just for mats or fur rugs and bragging rights and profit. And it doesn't stop there. There are many other animal species that are struggling for the same thing in their families. Many of them are also endangered, and wildlife numbers are decreasing. Yet hunters still claim that their work helps conservation efforts, when in reality, it does the opposite. It exacerbates the population decline of many imperiled species, such as the ones I just mentioned.
Hello?
Yes. And all this for a trophy. Pope Francis once said, "It is not enough to think of different species merely as potential resources to be exploited, while overlooking the fact that they have value in themselves." Each year sees the disappearance of thousands of plant and animal species which we will never know, which our children we will never see because they've been lost forever. And when I say that we overlook the fact that these species have value in themselves, I am not talking about their economic value. Wildlife should also have an equal say in this. I urge you to stand with me in condemning the killing of all wildlife and placing protections on them again. And that is why I am here today. I am here today because it is time for us to change. I've had enough. I've had enough of these wildlife killing contests and lack of protection. You aren't here to please trophy hunters or the fur industry. You are here to serve this state's wildlife. Please honor that responsibility, because you cannot kill off species while claiming that you're conserving them. Now I will ask you to pick your side. Do you want to please trophy hunters and trappers, or do you want to keep your promise to these species and protect this state's wildlife? Your choice. Make it now. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any other public comment for non-agenda items? Well, let's move on. Agency and state fiscal status report, Brad?
All right. Thanks, Chairman Lawver. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. This is Brad Lovelace. So as far as our budget situation, we have begun preparation for the fiscal year 21-22 cycles. Our EDIF apportionment is expected to remain the same at just over $5 million. And so our budget will remain static between fiscal year 21 and 22. We are in a process of making some adjustments to how we budget to be more accurate, and we plan to report more carefully on federal funds. There have been some areas where we didn't see a need and were never requested to report on some funds, and we just think it's a more transparent way to do business. So we plan to report on in more areas in the future just to be more comprehensive. So there's no question about the money we have and the money we need. With COVID-19, we obviously are all still struggling with that, and we continue to not know exactly how that'll impact us. It has caused some additional expenses this year. There has been some federal money we've been able to access to help us with those expenses, but we don't know how that'll impact ultimately the EDIF or the gaming monies that are available from the state. So that could impact our allotment of those. The park fee fund from state parks revenue finished up the fiscal year 2020 year 36% above what we had in 2019. So that was a great trend. Revenue from this past May and June were at historic levels. I think I may have reported last time we had our first $2 million revenue months ever in May and June. October revenues were also up from last year when we were flooded so much. So we're up significantly from where we were last year, just under 50%. Now, that being said, we've had a lot more expenses. We've had a lot of visitors at our parks, which is what we want, and we're glad for that. But it's caused more expenses, more personnel time, and all the resources that go with cleaning and supporting those visitors. So expenses have been higher, but thankfully revenues have been up significantly. So the park fee fund last year at this time was just over 3.8 million. Now it's at 5.2 million. So heading into the winter, we're feeling pretty good. As you'll recall, we had just under $10 million in expenses due to flood damage last year. We're starting to make those repairs as needed. We had nowhere near that amount of money saved for those repairs. So any surplus we have will definitely go into reclaiming those roads and parking areas and all the facilities that were lost or damaged during the flooding. On the Wildlife Fee Fund, we were up about just over 25% from where we were at this time last year. So that's also a good trend. We have been getting some forecasts from the federal government about how we're doing. As you all are aware, the sporting goods aisles were pretty bare this summer. As soon as they got fishing equipment or camping equipment or hunting equipment in, it flew off the shelves. So we expected those revenues to be up. The recent report we got on, as far as hunting, the Pittman-Robertson funds was indicating that the tax revenues that were expected to be up about 12.7, just shy of 13%, which is great news. That translates into just over $12 million that's potentially there for us to use. One of the things we'll be talking with you about in the future, as we have in the past, is the idea of raising our fee caps, because that federal money is great to have out there, but unless we generate money from our state revenues, our license sales, we can't access that money. That's what's used to leverage that federal money. So it's nice that they have a big supply of it there, but we have to keep up with inflation and all the other factors to keep our Kansas funds up so we can make good benefit of that federal money. So, but right now, at least the potential's there for us to access more federal money. And so we'll be continuing to talk with you about that. With that, I would stand for questions, Mr. Chair.
Are there any questions for Brad? This is Gerald. The only thing I would encourage as we do this, there was a confusion the last time we would try to get the fee caps raised, that we were trying to double everybody's fees, and certain unenlightened reporters picked that up. And I think this time we need to figure out how we go about bringing that forward and explaining that there's a difference between future potential and raising the fees now. I know that staff is aware of that, but that was where we got shot down last time because the optics were not particularly effective.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Brad Lovelace again. We were talking about that exact same idea just a few days ago, Chairman. And what we were talking about was, if you recall, part of our argument was that we really have been really modest in our increases over time. It tracks very well with inflation, in fact. And one of the things we talked about in order to take away that argument was potentially saying, what if in our proposal, instead of talking about a cap good for the next X number of years, talking about a regular increase, right? That would track with what we've been going through in terms of inflation over the last few years since the last increase, and projecting out some reasonable amount over time. So it takes away the concern that we may all of a sudden want to increase things all at once, but simply would develop a schedule basically for increases over time that could be adjusted every 5 years or whatever to fit back with the actual inflation rate and go along with that. That would apply to all our in-state licenses. The one exception that might be are some of our non-resident rates, like for non-resident deer permits, simply because that is tracked. A more accurate picture of what the market will bear there is kind of what our neighbors are charging and those kind of things. So we might not want to tie that to inflation quite in the same way, but I think it's worth a conversation about if we might want to say that in terms of in-state rates for hunting and fishing. So I think that's a great idea, and we'd love to talk about that.
Any other comments for Secretary Lovelace? Well, if not, we'll move on to the 2021 legislature with Chris Thomason.
Chris Tymason, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The elections just are new, so we don't know the makeup of the committees in the legislature. We'll see within probably the next couple of weeks those committee assignments, so we'll get a better idea of how we'll start the legislative session. We've got about 8 items that we're juggling to see where they fit best and timing wise how they'll fit. And the first one you and the secretary just had a conversation about, and that's somehow figuring out a way to raise those caps ultimately as we need to raise fees in the future in order to capture those federal dollars and continue operations at the same level that we're doing. So that would be the first item. Second is, we've talked about it before, there's still a piece of property down near Kingman that we'd like to add to the Kingman wildlife area. It seemed like everybody was in agreement last year, and it just couldn't get through the legislature 2 sessions ago, and then this last session, COVID cut everything short. So we're going to try that one again. We're still looking at law enforcement retirements in some fashion. We had talked about KPF the last couple of years, and we're still trying to figure out a path forward on that. We had a personal flotation device change at the federal level on the nomenclature of PFDs, and we have a reg that we need to change, but we can't change that regulation until we get the statute changed. And so we need to get that done as well. That didn't seem to go anywhere last year. And again, COVID coming in really shortened the legislative process and stopped a lot of things that were in their tracks right there. And only the necessary items to function for government actually made it through last spring. There's a slight change we'd like to ask for on park fee fund and boating fee fund related to retention of interest. On the wildlife side, we have provisions in our statutes that require the interest that is generated off those funds remain with the department, and we'd like to see that happen on the boating and park side. We've talked about dynamic pricing for parks before, and we're going to go ahead and try to push for that again in this next session for cabins and campsites. There is an update we'd like to ask for related to unlawful commercialization of wildlife, and there's a reference in there to an American Fisheries Society manual, which sets out restitution guidelines and costs to recover when somebody illegally commercializes wildlife, and that hasn't been updated for probably 10 years, and maybe we're on the 6th or 7th rendition since I last got it updated, and so we're going to ask for an update there. And then we've had a lot of talk recently about fish stockings and people stocking invasive fish, and so we'd like to get a prohibition there. It's currently prohibited on department lands and waters, but not in streams, for example. And that would be it.
All right, Gerald here. Stocking, if I wanted to put the wrong crawdad, crayfish, I can't remember which one we were concerned about, in my own pond, I can do that under existing statute. I just can't possess and sell it. It can't be used for bait. I guess I agree with what we're trying to do. I just thought there was already some restriction.
There are some restrictions already in place with the prohibited species list, and then we also have prohibitions on stocking public waters. because we don't want people to mess up the good work that some of our biologists are doing in managing those lakes and reservoirs. And so if they don't want a particular species in there, that is prohibited already, but it's not prohibited necessarily on streams throughout the state. So for example, if somebody wanted to put a species in a location that it doesn't currently exist, there might be a problem there. And so we would like to create a process that allows us to look at those like through a permitting system so we can make a judgment call before that stuff would occur.
Okay. Any questions for Chris? It remains to be seen what your legislative session is going to look like this year as well. At this point in time, I'm without prediction, other than I think it'll be awkward. So good luck, do the best you can do with it. If there's no other questions for Chris, then I would like to move to the general discussion and talk about pheasants with Jeff Prendergast.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. I got a slideshow here for you. We're going to break this up into two parts. Get it set up here. So you seeing my presenter view or are you seeing the full screen?
I think we're seeing the full screen.
Okay. All right. I'll apologize a little bit. I haven't got to spend as much time with this information as I normally would like to, but being the time of year it is, my phone here has been ringing off the hook with non-resident hunters, which is a good thing. But I've been on the phone pretty well continuously with bird hunters the last 2 weeks here. So, but I'll fumble my way through here. If you remember last year, we covered pretty extensively our Kansas upland game bird forecast and kind of the different things that go into that. This last year, there was some, the roadside brood surveys kind of came up in discussion across the country. And so we thought it'd be prudent to go ahead and to hit this again and just kind of emphasize what it is, what the information is used for and how it relates to our upland game bird forecast. I'll try not to make it as laborious as last time, but you might remember this graph from last year. This is just a summary of the different, the year of a pheasant and kind of how we measure what kind of surveys we use, measure different points in the pheasant's life throughout the year. Our roadside brood survey, circled in red down here, is how we measure annual production and fall densities. And so that's what we primarily rely on for the upland game bird forecast. Now, what stirred up all the attention nationally was South Dakota. This previous year, they had a task force that was put together to look at ways of improving marketing and pheasant hunting in general. And one of the things they decided to do was to cancel the pheasant roadside brood survey. South Dakota is one of the states that have been doing it the longest. They had 70 some years of data. This wasn't received well by a lot of hunters, outdoor riders, and so on, as you can kind of see from the sorts of headlines that they saw. What they decided to do instead of releasing estimates of densities or some sort of index to density is they went with more of a marketing approach of just harvest. As everyone knows, South Dakota is the king of pheasants. They shoot more pheasants than any other state every year. And that's essentially what their marketing strategy was for their pheasant outlook, is that come to South Dakota, we'll kill more pheasants in South Dakota than any other state will, which is not an incorrect statement. The concern was that they felt that whenever they got they were seeing population declines in their brood survey, that was being interpreted as it's not worth coming to South Dakota to hunt pheasants, when in actuality, even a bad year in South Dakota, they're still going to shoot more pheasants than anywhere else. However, I believe that the part of the decision to get rid of the roadside brood survey was misconceptions on how the information is used by the agency. There's this misconception that we don't use the information for management and it's purely just a hunter information, and that it doesn't really predict success. So to start with, I'm just going to quickly summarize our roadside brood survey, and then we'll address some of these misconceptions. So for our survey, we've got about 80 routes that we've got scattered across the state in randomly assigned counties. We start these routes at sunrise. We'll drive these, they're approximately 30 miles long. We'll drive the routes 4 times each, starting at sunrise between the middle of July and the end of August. What we do is we take advantage of that early morning, the behavior of the birds, where oftentimes early in the morning, the vegetation's wet from dew, and those birds will move out into the roadways to kind of dry off and get out of the wet grass and grit on the road. That gives us an opportunity to count the birds, and typically we think if higher density, we know we're not going to count all the birds. It's not a population estimate, but it's an index to the population where if there's more birds on the landscape, a higher proportion of those, or the same proportion of those birds we should be detecting on these routes. So more birds in the rows means there's more birds in the field. Because it's a standardized brood route now, as opposed to what our historic survey, I did fail to mention, we started our standardized survey in 2012. Before that, it was an opportunistic survey. But because we have a standardized survey that allows us to do a couple of things. One, we can compare different areas of the state to where we can show where the relative densities are. So we can show each year where we have the highest densities of birds within the state. And that would be our map on the left, where the darkest green is the highest densities. As you get it goes down to the medium green is the kind of medium high, then you have a medium low, and then the low densities. But it also allows us to look at how the densities change from year to year. That somebody that is, say you've got like Gerald's farm in Woodson County, you could look, if you hunt the same farm every year, you could look at the color, kind of what the region's showing for percent change. Red is bad, green is good, yellow is about the same. So surprise, surprise, Gerald's going to find just as many pheasants this year in Woodson County as he did last year. So considering the misconceptions, one of the ideas is that we're not using this information for management, it's only for hunter information. The reason that kind of comes up is because kind of the nature of small game. Harvest has very little impact on the population of small game animals. And so because of that, our regulations are set more based on social preference than it is on population needs, set more like turkey and deer, where those bigger game animals have lower production rates. So harvest can really impact their population. But because of that, you don't see us at the commission very often bringing forward new regulations, because we have set our regulations to kind of match what social preference is. And so there's not a lot of need to change those annually. But there's other ways that we use this information for management. So for instance, we can look at counties that have variable pheasant population. So here's Republic County in kind of north central, north of Salina, which has a relatively low pheasant production, pheasant per mile estimate right now. So for that county, we can take the landscape measures of that county, the different types of crops or CRP, what sort of habitat we have within that county. And then we can compare that to somewhere where we've got fairly high pheasant population estimates, such as Grand County, and look at what type of landscape covers are going to be producing higher densities of pheasants. Another thing, so here's an example from Iowa. Iowa is, again, one of those states that's been doing this for a long time, 70 some years. There's been some discussion on how the intensification of use of agrochemicals has impacted pheasants. So here, Iowa took and looked at the estimated brood size of pheasants in their survey in the 60s and 70s, and compared that to more recently after the intensification of agriculture. And so they can look at what the population or the trend is in brood size over that time period, and kind of look at some of those other things that maybe you did in the 50s, we didn't think about, like what we'd be using that information for in the future. Another example here is be like spatial habitat models. So this is for Nebraska. They produced based on other research, not a roadside brood survey, but produced a hot cold map, kind of like where is the most production potential for pheasants, or the most potential to produce pheasants in high densities. And we've been looking at trying to do some of this on a national scale through the National Wild Pheasant Committee. And but those roadside brood survey densities can really feed into that information, where we see, like, again, like I said, if we have a landscape with higher amounts of CRP that's producing higher pheasants, we can kind of feed that into the model and kind of produce this over time. What that would allow, things like this allow us to do, is we can really target areas where we feel like we're going to have the highest impact on our populations with our habitat type programs or any sort of initiatives that we might want to do. The other misconception that I mentioned was that counts don't accurately predict success. As I mentioned, we're fairly new. We've only got about 8 years of data, but so far our correlations are very tight to our pheasant per mile and quail per mile estimates off of the survey are very highly correlated with our average daily bags of both pheasants and quail. In fact, ours have a tighter correlation than most other states, and we feel that that's most likely because we run our routes 4 times to cover a lot of to get a better estimate of what the pheasant per mile actually is, where some of the other states do more routes, but they only do them once each. So, but the ones that are circled in red here, that's last year's estimate. So for pheasants, we had a little bit higher success rate than what we would have predicted, but our quail hunter success rates were exactly where we would expect them to be. So again, these are fairly tight correlations. As far as correlations go, it's pretty hard to get much better than that. That being said, that doesn't mean that we're not trying to improve it still. Here, the National Wild Pheasant Technical Committee that I'm a part of has been working with Iowa State to look at improving our estimates of pheasants so that we can make hunters more successful. So here's this, we got, I think it's 10 or 11 states participating in this project, where we're all running repetitive brood routes throughout the summer that Iowa State's in, looking at how environmental variables such as temperature or rainfall amounts or dew measures are impacting the amount of birds that we see on the road. And the reason we're doing that is because if say you get a drought year one year and a wet year the next, if more birds are in the roads on a wet year than they are on a dry year, then if we get, it could look like we see an increase the following year just because it's wetter and more birds get out in the road. So we want to be able to correct for environmental variables if we can. But even without that correction right now, we're showing pretty tight correlations with our harvest success. So with that said, the results from this past year's roadside survey showed that we were about 23% down in our statewide pheasant densities. That was largely from declines in the central and southwest region. The northwest stayed fairly similar to what it was last year, and that's our best region this year, this northwest corner. And you can kind of see that in these reds here, especially on the outer edges, and these kind of pockets of reds in the middle of the state. Quail, we saw a slight increase, non-significant increase. However, we saw significant increases in the central part of the state and significant decrease in the far southwest, or excuse me, the southeast. And so recent years, we've had higher hunting pressure out west or in the central part of the state than we have in the southeast. So while our average daily bag would predict that it should be about the same as last year, we might actually see a little bit higher success rate just because the quail populations are better where we're going to have more hunting pressure. So hunters should have a greater access to those birds than what they would have if they were spread out, throughout the southeast as well. As far as what I was asked to kind of touch on since the season's opened up, kind of what we've been seeing, how accurate the forecast is so far. I don't really get a lot of information now other than just a few hunter and visiting with some of our staff that have been out a little bit. I did take a couple of youth out into this kind of north central stuff during the youth season, and we did fairly well. We were moving about 2 coveys an hour on quail. And more pheasants than what I was expecting. But again, it seems like the pheasants have been real pockety. I was on opening day patrolling around Jetmore, and even within 5-6 miles, I talked to a couple of groups that were seeing lots of pheasants, and I went 5-6 miles west of there, and they had really struggled and hadn't really seen much anything. And that's kind of what we had indicated in the forecast we were expecting, just because of the spotty nature of our rainfall this last May and June. We just didn't get real good consistent rainfalls across a large area during that time frame when we needed it. But so far the individuals I've talked to, they've been hunting that northwest section of Kansas, have had some fairly good success. I've talked to a few people with limits of pheasants up there. The quail, maybe not. I've had a few reports of not really getting into as many quail on the eastern part of the central region as what we were expecting. But all in all, it appears like we should have a really good quail year. And while pheasants are going to be, we're probably going to struggle with pheasants in a lot of areas. There are definitely some spots in that northwestern region that are holding their own, and some pockets of stuff throughout most of the other state that you're still finding birds. So with that, I'll pause for any questions before we move on to our research update.
Jeff, this is Gerald. At some point in time, somehow I was thinking that we utilized rural mail carriers. Is that sort of the old way of doing things?
So historically, we used a combination of rural mail carrier as well as an opportunistic brood survey from our staff. The problem with that is it's not standardized. And so while it gives you some measure of production, you can look at chicks seen per hen. It doesn't give you the comparable, this many birds. You saw 10 birds this year and 20 birds next year, because you're not running the exact, those routes change as mailboxes go up and go down. The times of day aren't really matched with the highest activity levels. And so it's a lot harder to, it's harder to predict what those estimates actually mean.
And you may have a certain amount of varying enthusiasm among the rural mail carriers as to whether or not they're quite careful or moderately careful.
Yeah, we had one a couple years ago. We had to call on it. We had reported like 250 quail or something like that, which was, in a week's time on a mail route. And I think even now it's just surprising how we think of them as being really ubiquitous and everybody having an understanding of what they are. But it turned out, I think she was reporting, she thought meadowlarks were quail. So, I mean, using our trained staff where we know we're going to get the sort of data that we're looking for is a little bit more informative than some of those other. I mean, we still maintain the rural mail carrier route. It is our longest data set on upland game birds. It's just we use it for more ratio type data like chicks per hen or cocks per hen and some of those other sort of production indices.
Any other questions for Jeff? Okay, do you have more to present?
I do. So the second portion of this is relative to some research that we've been doing recently. We've been working on this project with K-State for the last several years here on evaluating the use of pheasants and cover crops across the western part of the state. This kind of originated from some of my interest in this position. I've always had a big interest in finding ways in which managing for wildlife habitat provides a benefit to producers. So often I feel like our producers feel like I can manage for wildlife or farm, as opposed, it's almost like it's viewed as two separate. I can do one or the other, but not both. You know, we want to take stuff out of production and put it in CRP, or we want you to leave that as a weedy edge or something of that nature. But anytime I think where we can provide a benefit to the producer, we have a lot better shot at actually getting some meaningful habitat on the landscape, and something we don't have to pay them for, something that's actually benefiting them themselves. So I'll start with a little bit of history here on pheasants in Kansas. For those of you that were lucky enough to live through it, the early 80s was when we kind of saw our highest pheasant harvest. 1982 is this real big peak right here where we harvested over 1.5 million pheasants. We had several consecutive years there we were at or very near or above or very near to 1 million pheasants in our harvest. We had a population drop there shortly after that in the mid 80s, and where we kind of stabilized and shot around 700,000 birds a year. With good conditions, that would jump up to 800,000 to 900,000, and bad conditions would drop down to about 6, but fairly stable there around that 700,000 mark until we hit the most recent drought that really kind of knocked the legs out from underneath our population for several years. When you compare that to South Dakota, the Pheasant King, you look at that same time frame where we were at in that late 70s, early 80s. There were several years where we were at or beating South Dakota, and we had several years where we were actually the #1 pheasant harvest state in the country. Prior to that, during the soil bank program days, South Dakota had a huge spike in pheasants where they were shooting over 3 million birds at some point in some years. And then whenever you got the introduction of CRP against South Dakota and several other states, really saw increases in their pheasant harvest related to the installation of that practice. Now, Kansas, while CRP is a very important and good habitat for us in Kansas, you can see here that our highest harvests were prior to the installation of CRP. The reason that is that when we had a lot of pheasants, it was during the wheat fallow rotations of the 60s and 70s, when we had in a lot of the high plains regions of western Kansas would get one crop every other year, where they would plant wheat one year, and then after harvest the field would set fallow for 14 months prior to planting the following wheat crop. And during that time frame, the weed management was not as intensive as what it is now. So you get a lot of fields that would end up looking like this one on the right, a lot of sunflowers, foxtails, a lot of other types of weedy cover that the pheasants just thrived in. So what you would get is we had these taller varieties of wheat that were cut later, so they provided excellent nesting cover. And then as these fields were harvested, you had these weedy fields these weeds that would blow up right after harvest, and these pheasants could move into these weedy fields, and it gave a great combination of cover where you had nesting cover right adjacent to high quality brood cover, and then these weedy fields produced had a lot of insects in them, so those chicks had high survival, and they produced a lot of highly energetic seeds that the birds could utilize for food throughout the winter. As we moved into that mid to late 80s, we started to intensify a lot of our cropping rotations. That same time, whenever CRP kind of got started. So CRP kind of helped stabilize us, but what we saw was we started breeding for shorter varieties of wheat to reduce problems with lodging. We started to introduce rotations that were more 2 crops and 3, so like a wheat milo fallow or a wheat corn fallow type rotation. So you see where, and because we had the 2 crops in 3 years, there was a need to control weeds more so that they could, for moisture conservation, to be able to sustain that second crop. So what you ended up with was a lot more fields that looked like this. So after the birds would nest in wheat, you'd come off the nest, but these fields that are sprayed, or alternatively, some of them were discs, but you would have a lot less weedy cover for those birds to move into. So not as high quality habitat. And so CRP during that time frame, because CRP planted was fairly weedy, while it wasn't as many acres as what we had in wheat, weedy wheat stubble, it still provided some sort of a stabilizing metric for us to keep our harvest and populations from dropping probably further than what they would have. So again, here you got the pheasants nesting in the wheat, and then so what habitat do they have to go to after they hatch out? This has continued to occur to us, and there's been some more recent concerns about cropland expansion. So this is a recent publication that looked at some of this intensification and cropland expansion in the U.S. As you see, the red spots through the Great Plains is where this seems to be the most intense, probably even more so up in the Dakotas than what we're seeing down here. But what they're doing is areas that historically would have not been cropped, that were lower producing areas, are starting to come into production. So these are things that we would have considered as like waste ground or waterways that now, instead of being planted to grass, are being tiled. Those fields are being tiled, or draining sloughs so that you can plant into those areas that you're not going to get as good a production off those areas on average. But even these small, 5 to 10 acre plots of waste ground were highly productive for wildlife. So when we consider Kansas specifically, 1982 was that year we had the highest pheasant harvest that we've ever recorded. Compared to this year, we went from 14 million acres of wheat to 6 million acres of wheat, which is about 50% loss in our total wheat acreage. Small wheat and other small grains, but for us, it's namely wheat, has always been considered a very important pheasant or one of the more beneficial upland game bird crops, because it provides that spring nesting type cover. Milo is one of our better row crops for wildlife because it, after harvest, the way it's cut, it provides a lot of ample cover that those birds can move through. And we've seen about a 25% loss in our Milo acres in that same time frame. Now, during that same time frame, we've had there's been a lot of genetic breeding or selective breeding of our other crops, so that we've seen great large increases in both soybeans and corn throughout the state, to the tune of several orders of magnitude. Now, while cotton there's only 200,000 acres of cotton, so it's not a major player. You can see that we've seen some major increases in the cotton, in the percentage of cotton in the state. And while probably at a statewide level, that's not really that important. There is some areas that are, we have some specific areas where there's a lot of cotton, and cotton is traditionally not viewed as a very wildlife friendly crop. It doesn't provide any food source. It relies really heavily on agrochemicals, and there's not much in the way of habitat left over after harvest. So with that all being said, we wanted to look at cover crops, because a cover crop is essentially a crop or something that's planted between your cash crops in order to provide some sort of resource, to address some sort of resource concern. And so there's an annual national cover crop use survey that's completed. This is some results from the 2017 survey that I had on hand, where we saw about 88% of producers that were asked were using some sort of cover crop, compared to 12% that weren't. As you can see, that the acreage of cover crops per farm is continually increasing, and it's doubled in about that 5 years. If you look back earlier, or if you look later, 18, 19, 20, I've seen this graph again, and it just continues to increase just like what it has. So what that does is that gives us an opportunity to take something like this field would have been historically a chemical fallow field that was clean, essentially desert, devoid of any potential habitat for wildlife, and put it into something like this that's actively green and growing and providing some cover as well as other resources for the birds. However, when you look at what the motivations are for using cover crops, these are, I mean, we're seeing a lot of it has to do with organic matter, reducing soil erosion. This weed control here that's at 43%, that's become increasingly important to farmers in Kansas here with the increase of Roundup resistant weeds. But you'll notice that wildlife is not anywhere on this list. There's other up here, so some portion of this 9% probably relates to people who are interested in wildlife. So I've always, going into this, I've always said I don't want to make the wildlife cover crop because the wildlife cover crop isn't going to sell. What we need to do is we need to find ways where, but most producers like to see wildlife. They enjoy pheasants, they enjoy quail, but and they'll do something, but they're not gonna, you know, they're making business decisions, so they're probably not gonna do just do the perfect wildlife crop if it doesn't make sense to them. So what we went into this project looking for a way of where we can put in cover crops that make the most sense for wildlife, and while they're addressing these other resource concerns, and what sort of tweaks can we make to mixes that would make them more wildlife friendly than what they could be otherwise. So when we look at Kansas, there's kind of three potential places that you could put a cover crop in. So if we're looking at a row crop rotation, and you think about you could put a cover crop in after harvest in the fall. That is so like after beans or corn that could be planted that would be carried through the winter. That would either winter kill or be terminated in the spring to prepare that field for the next row crop. After wheat harvest, we similarly, except for the wheat harvest being done in June and July, provides a little bit more time in that late summer time frame for a cover crop. That again is either going to winter terminate or be terminated in early spring to be able to prepare for that following row crop. The other one is out west here, where we still have a fair bit of summer fallow. After the row crop is harvested in fall, these fields will sit fallow for until the following fall to plant wheat. And that gives us a window during that summer time frame to be able to plant a cover crop in there during the traditional fallow period. Now for pheasants, what we're really looking for is production cover, so nesting and brooding. So if you consider this graph here overlays our peak pheasant hatch graph. If you consider the after row crop, it's really not providing much in the way of cover during that production time frame. Now, the after wheat harvest is similarly, but you are maybe picking up some of that late, the later part of the nesting season, so some late brood, some re-nesting hens may be able to utilize these later cover crops. While the summer fallow lines up almost perfectly with it, where right as the nesting chicks are starting to hatch out, if you put that summer fallow out there, that gives them that kind of weedy component that we've lost from our weedy wheat fallow. It gives those chicks an opportunity to shift into that type of cover and utilize that during the summer. So that's kind of where our main focus has been. There's been a couple of studies started to look at these other after row crop, after wheat harvest type cover crops, and the production or the potential nesting cover in the those after they spray them, that residual cover that's still there. But we're still kind of waiting to see what the results of those are. But right now, we're really focused on that brooding habitat that we've lost in our weedy wheat fallow. So that way we can take where we get a wheat field adjacent to what would have been a chemical fallow field, and then now you provide the pheasant chicks high quality production field to go in, or high quality habitat to go into following hatch. There are just a couple of examples of some of these fields. You can see that it's producing really good overhead cover. These are, waist high, 4-wheeler high, so 2 to 3 foot tall type cover. You can see the flowers and different brood, or the different forbs that are in here. So that's going to attract insects. And in fact, here's this top right picture is a leaf of a brassica that's in one of those mixes. It's just covered in those arthropods those really important for those young chicks as a food source. So for our project, we looked at, we didn't want a single wildlife mix. We had to have some mixes to evaluate. So we chose 4 different treatments. First, for our control, we used the traditional chemical fallow. We used a chick magnet, which is a mix that Starseed produced. It's a broadleaf only mix. It did not include any sort of an annual grass like oats or rye. Originally we thought that one was designed for pheasant chicks brooding, and we kind of thought that would be one of the better mixes. We had Green Spring, which is another traditional like ag low diversity mix. It's all it is oats and peas. And then we had a more diverse mix that was designed to try to incorporate a lot of different a lot of the different broadleaves for the pheasants, as well as the annual grass oat component that will produce some of that organic matter that the producers are really after. So to do this, what we did is we captured pheasants and put radio collars on hens and followed them through the season. We strapped technicians onto the front of a truck with these little chairs, drove around in CRP at night with spotlights when the birds don't really want to fly, and when they'd see birds running, they bail off the front and try to catch them. I think they avoided skunks for most of the project anyways. We'd follow the birds in for the following throughout the spring and summer to get an idea of where they were spending their time, where the hens were spending their time, where were they putting their nests at, where were they taking the chicks to, what sort of survival they were getting. And so from that, I'm just going to highlight a few key results. The first is based on the hens, where they were selected or where they were spending most of their time. And if you look at there's this purple line that cuts across here. Anything above that purple line means that they were using it more than what we would expect. And anything below that means they're using it less than what we'd expect. And that's just based on, if you've got 10% of your ground is in cover crop and they spend 90% of their time in it, it's going to be above 1 because they're spending more time in it than what you would expect just based on its availability. So what we saw there was CRP and a couple of the cover crop mixes were highly selected for, while a lot of the other more traditional type cover that was out there was selected against, which is good to see that they're using it. Here, this is showing where the hens put their nests. So we only had 2 nests in cover crops, which is kind of what we were expecting, because those summer fallow cover crops, they don't get planted until about the time hens are starting to nest. And so they weren't tall enough to really support a nest until after the nesting season's really already underway. But what we did see was over half of our nests were in CRP. Even though wheat was a bigger component on the landscape, it's not being selected for nearly as much as what we would have expected for it to be traditionally. And then here, just brood use. When they were after the nests hatched out, when they were following the hens, what we saw is about almost 25% of our brood locations were within cover crop fields. And while these other habitat types had more locations in them. One thing to remember there is that cover crops made up actually a much smaller proportion of the study area. So they were spending more time in cover crops despite there being much less of it on the landscape. And then this picture here in the upper right, we also saw several pheasant broods that we didn't have marked using cover crops. So we know that, and this is after termination. After this field was already sprayed out, and that was something we saw, was that broods were continuing to use these fields throughout July, even though they had already been killed to prep those fields for wheat, the following wheat crop. So it's providing that cover, and it seems to be lasting throughout the brood season, and it seems to be highly attractive to the birds. Finally, and probably most importantly, when we combined all the metrics from hen survival, brood survival, nest survival, you look at over here on this far right side, this lambda value, that's just a representation of the population growth rate. So if you just look at the top two lines, the top lines are birds that had no cover crop in their home range versus birds that had at least some cover crop in their home range. And so just by having some cover crop in their home range, we saw about a 20% increase in the population growth rate of those birds. So it's kind of exciting for us. We've been working with cover crops for a long time, so it's good to finally have the data to kind of support what we were already thinking. A few things that did come out of this as well was where we put cover crops. Well, cover crops are going to be good anywhere, but they were most successful when placed adjacent to CRP or other high quality nesting habitat, which makes sense if you think about it, because of those pheasant chicks aren't as mobile when they're real young, first hatched out. So adjacent to nesting cover, those birds can move into them quickly and start using it, versus if it's placed out on the landscape as an isolated habitat island. And given we're not seeing a lot of wheat use for nesting, even the wheat, it calls into question how valuable those are there. But targeting this next to some adjacent to some high quality nesting cover seems to be providing good habitat and positive impacts for our populations. So that's all for me. So if you all have any questions, I'll try my best to answer them.
Thank you, Jeff. Does anybody have any questions for Jeff? This is Gerald.
Hey, Jeff, this is Commissioner Spoor. Can you tell me who does the surveys?
Are you referring to the roadside surveys?
Yes.
That's our staff. So our district biologist, we use it. A lot of our district biologists, game wardens, few fisheries staff, some of our public land staff. So it's a mix of all of our staff, but it's our staff.
And the same staff member runs the same route?
Yes. So each person is assigned a route and they run it 4 times.
Since I've been on the commission, I've interviewed many rural mail carriers and asked them about the surveys and the counts. And I've never heard anybody talk about being positive about it and doing a good job with the mail carrier routes. That's just an FYI, it's just my insight. But I guess I'm really interested in your cover crop idea and the thought of it. And we don't use cover crops on our farm because we use stripper stubble wheat. So I guess I've never really seen a importance of a cover crop yet. And I'm not seeing too much of it in Western Kansas, but what I am seeing is the ability for the farmers to identify non-productive acres and give them back to the pheasants, and trying to identify areas that probably aren't meant for high production agriculture. I'm hearing lots of talk about the CRP program. There is lots of acres coming out this year. Obviously there must have been a big sign up 10 or 15 years ago, And I'm hearing about a lot of the CRP acres that are going to go back to productive agriculture this year. So I'm really concerned about that. A couple things. The CRP payments are going to be reduced in western Kansas by as much as $4 an acre. And obviously higher commodity prices are driving, people to break this CRP back out. And I guess over the last 3 or 4 years, I've really felt like we've had good nesting habitat for the pheasants, but we still haven't increased the numbers of pheasants. And I'm extremely concerned. I am concerned about going in the direction South Dakota is. And I guess everybody has an idea of why they quit doing their brood surveys, but there's a pretty good reason why they probably didn't do it. But Jeff, it was a really good presentation and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, there's a few things I could address there if you'd like. The CRP, I think you mentioned $4 an acre. Some places it's worse than that. And we had over 500,000 acres expire, but our net loss was only 80,000 acres, which is bad. But considering we had 500,000 acres, over 500,000 acres expire, we were glad to see that we didn't lose more in the re-enrollment. But the reason we saw such a decline in the rental rates was it was in the new farm bill. They increased the acreage over 5 years by 5 million acres, but they wanted that program to stay cost neutral. So they cut the rental rates across all the newly enrolled contracts so that they could increase the acreage. So more acres, less money, but the program cost stayed the same. I know we've been through a lot of the national groups I work with, both on the quail and pheasant side. There's a big concern there, and they deal with a lot of the senators and reps in DC, and there's concern from some of the senators and reps in DC about the direction that farm bills that the CRP program's going, especially out in our reps from this part of the world. So we're hoping that we get a little movement on that. It may not be till the next farm bill, but there's some other levers that we can pull before then to increase signups. But and cover crops in our part of the world out here, Troy, is definitely a harder sell. The biggest concern is moisture, and people are concerned about planting something that's going to be taking moisture away from the following crop. We're seeing more of the early adoption out here right now, and we work with several people across the western part of the state. I won't call them out by name, but several farmers throughout Graham County, Sheridan County, Norton County, and it's more of a long-term strategy. Sometimes you can get an immediate yield drag the year you plant them, but it seems to be that in the long term, if you can increase your organic matter with the use of cover crops, you can increase your moisture storage potential. You can increase your infiltration rate by having with those cover crops on the ground, because you don't get when you do get those big storms in the summer, it doesn't run off. It hits and soaks into the ground. So there is some promise for it. It's definitely going to be it's an uphill battle. It's even just a mentality, just because it seems like if you plant something out there, you're using moisture. So it's kind of a counterintuitive to think that you can actually save moisture by planting something in the long run. But it's definitely there's a lot of tradition, and we're kind of stuck in our ways in how we do things. So I don't expect it to change overnight, but it seems like we're seeing a little bit more of it every day.
Jeff, Commissioner Fowler, good report. I appreciate it. And maybe you said, but is there a particular cover crop that seems to be more attractive than others?
Oh, sorry. I think I forgot to mention that. So right now, what we're looking at is that the higher diversity, the cover crop. So what we want is the it seems like that the chick magnet mix did not perform as well as what we expected. The all broadleaf mix, some sort of a annual grass like an oat or a rye in there provides more overhead cover for the birds. Now, and then as diverse as you can be is better, but considering as well the cost of those mixes is important. So providing some of those, a lot of times what we do is we'll try to, one of the guys we work with on the custom mix, he always wants to have 2 or 3 of each of a legume, a brassica, and so on and so forth. But, and his thought on that is if one fails, like some years are a good pea year, but some years are a better red clover year. So if you have both of those legumes in there, you're more likely to get one of them to succeed. But that can drive your price up. So within reason, having some sort of an annual grass in there for cover, and then just a diverse group of broadleafs. We like to see some sort of a brassica, turnip, or a radish. We like to see a legume in there if we can. Sunflower, a lot of times they put some sort of a broadleaf in there, so like a sunflower or a safflower. But most of the seed companies are kind of able to work with you on what sort of a mix you're looking for. And our biologists for those that are interested, our biologists are well in tune to this and willing and able to work with it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Jeff? Jeff, that's a good report.
Chairman Lauber?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Brad Lovelace. A comment and a question. First comment is, Jeff, I really appreciated you pointing out in the beginning that for us to be successful, we really have to do things that help the farmer's bottom line with this. And I'm aware in some other states where bankers have figured this out and they are starting to require soil organic levels when they get a request for loans from the farmers, because they've realized that productivity ultimately is based on increasing organic levels over time. And so they know that, and that's directly related to cover crops, as you're aware. So they're figuring that out. So hopefully we can communicate that and make that a selling point over the long run. The question I wanted to ask you is this. Early on, when people were talking about cover crops, I remember hearing a lot of constraints with NRCS programs about when those cover crops had to be terminated, and it was complicated and potentially got people in trouble. Has that gotten any easier to navigate all that if you want to plant cover crops?
Yeah. So what you're referring to mostly is or I believe what you're referring to is the termination dates relative to risk management agency. So that was to do with the crop insurance. In order to insure it as a summer fallow practice in the western part of the state, you had to terminate the cover crop at such a point in advance, 90 days or something. It has loosened up a little bit. There's still some questions about it, it seems like, all the time, but I know a lot of the guys that are doing it are they believe in it enough that they're willing to, even if they had to give up their crop insurance for it or pay the higher rate, that they would do that. But yeah, I believe that it's been a while since I've looked at those termination dates, but I believe they've got it knocked back to 60 days, which provides ample time. Most of these guys are recommended to terminate it in late June, early July anyways, because you don't want some of those other annual weeds to go to seed, or the oats or some of those other things to go to seed that could cause problems in the following wheat crop. So I believe that have straightened itself out.
Okay. Any other questions for Jeff?
Mr. Chairman, Mike
Yeah.
Miller. Hey, Jeff, when we did that pheasant tour and we were up in Northwest Kansas with that young landowner that was using cover crops, one of his biggest points of emphasis was reducing his chemical input You mentioned water or moisture being one of the biggest concerns now. Is there still an emphasis on reducing chemical input, or is that not near as much of a concern now?
Oh, yeah, it is. So a lot of the guys that are using it, I mean, because you can reduce the amount of chemical you know, on a traditional chem fallow, you know, a lot of times you're spraying 3 times, where he's getting away with 1 spraying by using all he has to do is spray to terminate the cover crop, because it's actually out competing the weeds. And we've actually planted cover crops on some of our own ground over at Wilson and seen it completely out compete Johnson grass, which I didn't think was possible. So, but a lot of the concern before people go to cover crops tends to be, well, we can't do it out here because we don't have enough moisture. We can't sacrifice the moisture. Brett, the individual that you were referring to, he had looked at it on the opposite side. And if I remember correctly, I think he told us that prior to using cover crops, he had totaled his chemical usage up, and he had spent $800,000 on chemicals in a year. And he said that's what got him to go to cover crops, because that number scared him. And through the use of cover crops, he had reduced his chemical cost down to $200,000. So that in itself would pay for, there's other concerns, the cost of the seed and so on. But if you can reduce chemical costs down by that, you can improve while you're improving your soil organic matter and all those other resource concerns. You should still break even or better on even having to buy the seed. And I'm not an ag economist, so don't quote me on any of that. But just my understanding of what I hear from producers that are using it, that's kind of the general understanding.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Jeff? Well, thank you very much. Let's move on to a CWD update with Levi and Nadia.
Gerald, Commissioner.
Yes.
This is Jason. We did have one question from the public. Are there education programs for farmers to point out these benefits? If you're still there, Jeff.
Yeah, sorry, trying to get unmuted. So there's a lot of opportunities. So the way we initially got involved with it is there's NRCS and a lot of the conservation districts sponsor cover crop field days. So there's a lot of field days locally. If you talk to your local NRCS office, they should be able to get you in touch with that, as well as there's a lot of different informational material that they can probably provide as far as brochures and booklets, or like I said, if you're interested from a wildlife perspective, a lot of our wildlife biologists are becoming very well versed in the types of cover crops we can use to kind of do both ag and wildlife. So.
Sounds good.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, Levi? Nadia, you're up.
Thank you. Nadia Reimer, Chief of Public Affairs. So we've got Levi's name written first in the agenda, but I'll be presenting my portion first. Just a FYI, my hotel room is near a busy highway. So if you hear Jake brakes outside the window, I apologize. If you can't hear anything, just let me know and I'll repeat myself. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Can everybody see this okay? They have nodding heads. All right. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, thank you for your time today. Obviously, Levi Jaster and our wildlife division has been coming to the commission for some time now as we continue to develop a strategy for managing chronic wasting disease in the state. So our shop, the Public Affairs Shop, has been working closely with Shane and Levi to come up with a strategy for how we are going to communicate this with our constituents. So my presentation today is going to kind of be a broad overview of the communications campaign that we've developed to date. This is just kind of a sky high view. I won't get into too terrible much detail as I hope to continue these presentations with the commission as more materials develop. But we did launch the beginning of this campaign this month, so it's really exciting to be able to share with you what we have to date. I'm going to start with just some basic stats that we obtained from a survey that Levi conducted earlier this year with our hunters. And one of the stats that was kind of surprising to me was, 80% of the respondents indicated that they were aware CWD exists in Kansas. As a communicator, I'm thinking, if 82% are aware, why do we need to do a campaign? But as we delve deeper into the stats, we realized that that knowledge base isn't quite as deep as it may appear. 50% of the respondents weren't sure whether a cure existed. Obviously, we know that a cure does not exist. If it did, we would be implementing it here in Kansas. 38% of respondents indicated that they weren't aware the disease is fatal. This is huge because we know that CWD is 100% fatal. So obviously we would want 100% of our hunters to be aware of that. Another stat that was kind of surprising was nearly a third of the respondents indicated that they weren't aware whether CWD was present in the deer management unit that they lived in or hunted in. Again, obviously, we would want 100% of hunters to be aware of whether or not they're living or hunting in an area that has been positive for CWD in the past. So some of the objectives with our campaign, in no particular order, are to create a centralized information portal. So we want to make it really easy for our constituents to be able to get the information they need in one location. Currently, that information is kind of scattered between the hunting regulation summary, various news releases. We do have information on our website, but our goal here is to continually drive individuals to one information source. And I'll get into detail later about what that source is. We want to make sure that we clearly define what is CWD. So that's still not a question that 100% of our respondents are able to answer. We also want to clarify what the symptoms are and the particular stages of the disease. So again, this information is already public facing, but there's still not clarity or consistency among the answers that we're getting. Another objective is to make sure that we identify the CWD positive locations in Kansas. Again, if a third of our hunter respondents aren't aware of where those locations are, whether they're living in one and processing their deer there or hunting in a deer management unit that's positive, that's an issue. So we really want to lessen those knowledge gaps. We also want to make sure that we're doing a good job of sharing testing information and opportunities. Obviously, we've received some grant funding recently that I know Levi's talked to you about that has created an opportunity for us to conduct additional testing. We need to make sure that hunters are aware of that. And then lastly, we want to be able to provide our key stakeholders with clear action steps that they can adopt. So this campaign is kind of twofold in the sense that it's really education and action. So if we can educate our key stakeholders and provide them with actionable steps that they can take, we feel that we're going to be a lot more successful in managing the spread of CWD in Kansas. So who are those key stakeholders? Who are the individuals that we're going to be targeting with this campaign? First and foremost, our hunters. I think that goes without saying. And then my presentation here, you'll see launched November 2020. So this is kind of a three-part campaign. The materials I'm going to show you today are specific to our hunting community. And then we're in development with materials that are specific to wildlife watchers or general wildlife enthusiasts who may not hunt. And then also our landowners. We know in our state that we can't be successful with any measure of wild game management if we don't have the partnership of our landowners. So you can see here, this is the campaign slogan and logo that we'll be utilizing for our campaign. It's called Take Aim at the Spread. And kind of our tagline is help suppress chronic wasting disease. Getting into some of the key messages that we're going to be sharing with this campaign are get the game plan. This particular message is going to invite hunters, landowners, and wildlife watchers to join in the fight to suppress CWD in Kansas. So part of this game plan, again, is to give stakeholders specific action steps that they can deploy in the field, on their property, that can help suppress the spread. Another key message of this campaign is watch the waste. Again, we want to make sure that hunters, wildlife watchers, landowners have a very clear picture of what are the symptoms they're supposed to be watching for. And we also want to make sure that these are symptoms that can easily be viewed from a distance, because we noticed when we kind of took an inventory of the symptoms that we were providing to the public, it ran the gamut, right? And that was accurate. But a lot of those things may not have been visible unless you were up close, in a tree stand where deer would be nearby. So we want to make sure that it's user-friendly by making sure that these are symptoms we're sharing that can be viewed from far away. So something that I'll mention here is another facet of this campaign is also making sure that our key stakeholders don't think that just because a deer shows, we want to make sure that they know that deer that are CWD positive can be asymptomatic. So just like COVID and just like people, just because we don't see visible symptoms does not mean that that isn't a CWD positive deer. So I share this particular key message with that caveat. And the last key message that we'll use when targeting our hunting community is dress, test, suppress. So we wanted a really easy message that they could remember. And what this particular message encourages is our hunters to bone out or quarter their meat on site, dispose of their carcasses locally, and then also test their deer if it's taken from a CWD positive location. So again, we're trying to, as Levi's strategy, shows, we're trying to find actionable steps that hunters can take that, obviously this is on a volunteer basis right now, but again, it's something specific that they can deploy if they so choose. So how are we going to convey these key messages to these key stakeholders? It's going to be an integrated communications campaign. So we're going to use traditional, social, digital, and print media. And Levi may be going into some detail about this particular survey that he conducted with our hunters. And we found that some of the results were really surprising, and that our hunters indicated they would like a lot of this information electronically, specifically in downloadable PDFs. So as we get more information about hunter preferences, we will incorporate that into this campaign. And then we're literally going to take the message on the road. And by that, I mean, we're going to be looking at billboard placement. So beginning next year, we are going to work to identify some of the key locations in Kansas where our non-resident and resident hunters are traveling, and then have billboards that drive them to our landing page. And I'll talk about that more. Again, that centralized information portal. Another item that we're going to deploy in this campaign are digital media ad placements and social media posts. These are really great in the sense that we get real-time analytics. We can also micro-target and make sure that these messages are getting spoon-fed into the news feeds of the individuals that we're trying to reach. So it's really customizable. It's a great use of funds, again, because it's so targeted. And again, the real-time analytics allow us to be flexible and make decisions on the spot if needed, as opposed to doing, print ads or something that's a little bit more stagnant. Another tool that we're going to deploy are flyers and fact sheets. So we will distribute these to our license vendors, regional offices, big retailers, and then also offer them online. Decals, same thing. We'll distribute those throughout the state. Again, driving individuals to our landing page. We have a video that's in production that will be shared digitally. And then the landing page. So you can see here, this is actually launched this month. So I encourage commissioners to check this out following the commission meeting. The link to this site is cwdks.com. And this is that centralized information portal. So all of our digital ads, all of the fact sheets, the flyers, even ksoutdoors.com are going to drive constituents to this one location where they can obtain downloadable PDFs, easy access to mapping, additional resources, contact information, everything they might need related to CWD in Kansas. So how will we measure success? So obviously the way that my shop operates is a little bit different than the biology side. So from a public affairs perspective, the things that we are going to be looking at that are going to determine success for us are increased engagement with our social and digital media, looking at the landing page visitation, how many people are visiting that website, how long are they staying there, what pages are visited most, how many people are downloading the particular PDFs we provide. We'll also look at email read rates. We would work with Levi to conduct a follow-up survey. So again, we have this great data set to go off of initially. So if we can measure and see that some of these knowledge gaps have decreased, that's success in my mind. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, is increased advocacy of our regulatory changes that are being presented by Levi. So some of the next steps that we'll be looking at with this campaign, again, we're just in the beginning stages. We do need to go ahead and distribute our printed materials. We're going to get an email campaign developed, again, based off the feedback that Levi received, knowing that our hunters want information digitally. We're going to go ahead and present that to them through email, finalize our billboard placements for 2021, and then also continue the development of campaigns that are targeted to our wildlife watchers and landowners. So with that being said, I just want to give a special thanks to Shane and Levi. They've both been tremendous resources. It's been a really good exercise, taking the knowledge that they have and distilling it down for the common Joe. So I think it's working out really, really well. We do plan to add additional resources to cwdks.com over time. So again, if you guys are to visit that website today, it may not look the same 3-6 months from now, because we're going to continue to drive individuals there and add more resources. And then also our advertising agency has done a really phenomenal job of pulling these materials together based on our input. So with that, I will stand for any questions.
This is Commissioner Sill. How many people responded to your survey?
Nadia Reimer, Chief of Public Affairs. Levi actually conducted the survey, so I'll have to have him answer that one.
Okay.
All right, now I'm unmuted. They sent out about 5,000 cards to hunters across Kansas, and we got back almost 1,500 of those, which is about a 30% return rate, which is right in line with what we normally see on our deer harvest surveys, postseason surveys. And that means our Kansans respond much better than the national average to our survey requests. They're really good about providing us with information when we ask for it.
Commissioner Sill, did you survey non-residents?
Levi Jaster. Yeah, we did. I'll get into that a little bit in my presentation, but about 30% of our respondents in this survey were non-residents.
Any other questions for Nadia before Levi takes over?
All right,
okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, I will be sharing my screen here. Okay, Levi Jaster, Emporia, Kansas. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this hunter knowledge, perceptions, and opinion human dimension survey that we conducted. This actually had a couple of steps. The first step is we sent surveys out to all the different state agencies across the country to ask them, what steps had they taken? What strategies, regulations had they adopted to help with combating the spread of CWD? And from that, we use that information to guide us in our survey of hunters to ask them more about the options that other states had taken beyond what we are doing in Kansas that seemed like they might be a good fit and that they had recorded that they had had some success with. So with that, I will jump in, just kind of a little information about the people that got the survey that returned it to us, because, you know, knowing a little bit about your audience or your recipients and how, you know, who responded, what perceptions might they have, what is driving some of that. And so for our survey, we had 94% of them were male, and the average age was 54 years. 70% were residents, 30% were non-residents, and the main states were Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Michigan, Colorado, and Minnesota. And I highlighted the color, or put the red color on Missouri, Michigan, Colorado, and Minnesota, because these are all states that, well, every state on this list has chronic wasting disease within its borders. But those 4 states are the states that have taken a much more aggressive response to CWD management within their states. And so that could certainly impact how people responded to our survey as far as non-residents. What we did see was there were no differences that we could really tell between residents and non-residents in their total years of hunting experience, how many years they've hunted in Kansas, how often they hunt, or how often they at least purchase a permit, and whether or not they were hunting in a chronic wasting disease positive or not positive deer management unit in Kansas. So when we asked them what their experience with hunting was, only 1% that hunted in or out of a CWD positive DMU in Kansas had ever had a deer test positive. Their processing methods, mostly folks are processing it at home, especially out in where we have positive DMUs, which makes a little bit of sense considering that that's all Western Kansas. And so they have to expend more effort to get to their processors. As you can see in the miles to the processor, the average distance to a processor in non-DMU positive, CWD positive DMUs is 10 miles versus almost 4 times that in positive DMUs. We also see that of the ones that took a deer to a taxidermist last year, which was about 10% that did not hunt in a positive DMU versus 13% that did. The hunters that hunted in a positive DMU were much greater distance in this case. And some of this is due to hunters in our DMUs that are have had positive CWD detections are out in Western Kansas and tend to be traveling, have to travel more. And then we're seeing about 4% of our hunters across the border donating venison to a food bank. So to kind of hit the highlights, this report is pretty large. There's a lot of information in it, way more than I can present today. And we're working on getting some revisions as far as what's reported and a couple additional analyses recorded. And then once we've got that wrapped up, we'll be getting this pushed out and published. So you're actually seeing a lot of this first time it's been presented anywhere. But for our hunters, 34% knew that CWD had not always been present in Kansas. 35% knew that it was not found in every state. Again, only, as Nadia mentioned, 38% knew CWD was always fatal. 82% did know that it was found in Kansas. Only 26% knew that we had not found it in wild elk in Kansas as of yet. And I put the emphasis on wild because we have had a couple of detections in captive elk. And only 13% knew that it takes 18 to 24 months for symptoms to appear, which is concerning that they don't realize that we could have deer that look perfectly healthy that do have chronic wasting disease. And only a third of them knew that deer can get it through just environmental contamination, not just deer interactions. But on average, we saw that hunters in CWD positive DMUs knew a little bit more about CWD in general than hunters that were hunting outside of those, or in DMUs where we have yet to detect chronic wasting disease. So it's kind of a, we learn when we feel it's going to affect us. But that difference wasn't that large. And so we did ask them, here are some potential management actions that we can take. And, how acceptable or unacceptable. And we did ask, completely unacceptable, slightly unacceptable. Were they unsure about it? Was it slightly acceptable or completely acceptable? And I combined the the completely and the slightly for both acceptable and unacceptable, just to kind of present the data a little more cleanly. And so some of the highlights, they largely support using hunting to help suppress CWD in places where it's found. They're not supportive of agency sharpshooting, which in my mind is a good thing because we're not a large agency compared to states that engage in sharpshooting, and it quickly becomes a bear of a program to keep going and to fund. They were also generally found it unacceptable to ban feeding or minerals all year. But they also were slightly less likely to, or find it unacceptable to do it outside of the hunting seasons. They generally were not in favor of restricting carcasses to DMUs, but were a little more supportive, although not much, of partial restrictions on carcasses. But they were rather supportive, surprisingly, on making testing mandatory in DMUs where we've detected CWD, and in finding ways to provide testing statewide every year rather than our rotations. So we certainly have at least some support potentially to explore testing and helping hunters that way and learning that information a little more. And so kind of some of the other highlights here is that 58% think that the department is not providing enough information. And so, that's, knowledge that we're kind of learning as we've already started increasing our communication efforts and providing more information, but it certainly confirms why we were going that way. And we're going to, be able to use the information from this survey to better target, what we need to get out to hunters. 61% think we're providing the best available information. About a third of our hunters would like to see more opportunity to provide more comment on chronic wasting disease concerns. 60% think we're following the best science in managing chronic wasting disease. Almost 60% think we're properly addressing it for Kansas. and 66% think CWD is a serious threat. So, 2/3 of them think that this is definitely something we should be dealing with. They may not be in favor of many of the options that seem to have the most success, but potentially that's something that we can work on addressing through education. To further build on this, during the 2019 to 2020 postseason deer harvest survey, in the special section of that, we asked hunters more information about what information, or to provide some, opinions about what information is important to them that we've put out there, and how best to get that to them. And so, of things that we currently publish, I want to draw your attention right there to the deer disease. Anything we publish on that, hunters want. And to kind of further explain this graph here, this is basically a scale of very unimportant to very important. And where the dots fall on the graph indicate the average response. And a larger dot means that the general responses were disagreed more with each other. Whereas a tiny dot means most of the responses, they agreed strongly. Most of those were around that area. And so even more so than getting our regulation summaries out to hunters, they want deer disease information, especially our residents. The residents were in high agreement that this is very important information to them. And so that was one of the one of the only two spots besides that non-residents had placed higher importance on information than non-residents. And so we also asked them, how do they want to get their information? How can we get that to them in their hands? What's the best way? And so we asked them to rank our potential options that our public affairs group has available for us to get information out. And then far and away, the number one choice was PDFs they could download and basically take with them from our website or wherever we can get it to them. After that, it kind of got a little fuzzier. So what I did was I combined their first and second choices into this graph to see if that would clarify it a little bit more. And again, PDFs came out as the most preferred choice. But then, especially for our residents, they want us to email that to them. They want to get it, right there ready. And then there's a little bit more preference for print formats. And I think some of this, these are kind of general trends across this information. We're going to be breaking this up into other categories besides resident and non-resident. We've got we asked them to self-identify what property they hunt on, whether they own land, they hunt on land that they own for ag or lease, whether they do it on land that they own for recreation, whether it's public land or just private that they can hunt. And so we'll be breaking this kind of information up by that too, to make sure that, landowners get information the best way for them versus our general hunters, or even potentially looking at hunters by age classifications, just to get the information to them the best way. And so kind of some key points to go away with is that, 82% of our hunters know that chronic wasting disease exists in Kansas. 29% though are unaware if they hunted in a unit that was positive. But 89% see that hunting as the most effective method of controlling chronic wasting disease. There was a concerning lack of knowledge of chronic wasting disease, but Kansas hunters, their perceptions and knowledge of chronic wasting disease are not any different when compared to what they've found in other states. on the bright side, Kansas hunters expressed a relatively high level of trust in the department on chronic wasting disease issues. And while, if you look back, it was, in the 50 to 60 some percent range relative to hunter trust in other states, that's pretty phenomenal, actually. And our hunters really want information about this. And now we know a little bit more. To go back to what Nadia is producing, we can get the information to hunters in the way they prefer, which hopefully means that they'll utilize it a little more. And so just to kind of leave on a more positive note, though, I'm going to leave you with this, that in regards to chronic wasting disease in Kansas, we have work to do, and we need to focus on communication and education. But most importantly, we have a strong foundation with our hunters to start building upon. So that will be that's a key thing to be able to work from, to, communicate with our hunters, educate them, and, start working to improve our situation in Kansas in regards to chronic wasting disease. And that will wrap up my presentation. And so I'll take questions now.
Any questions for Levi? Lauren?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Sill. I really appreciate what you and Nadia have done there. That's an awesome start. Can you go back to the slide about the things that hunters supported?
Levi Jaster, yes, I can put that back up. There.
So in that short amount of time, I didn't process real fast, but it looks like the things that are supported are the monitoring types of things versus steps that require action and would require us as hunters to change. Those things are not supported. Am I reading that kind of right?
Yeah, it came down to, we can keep track of it, we can support it, but in general, most of the tools in the toolbox, they're not in favor of us using, except for pretty good support to try and do that through hunting. Now that's a tough one to get people to take more deer when they've already got as many deer as they probably normally want to take. And that's a generalized across the entire group. It's a little less supported when it's just the people that live in those DMUs that are positive, where they would be the ones that experience lower deer numbers.
How long do you think that you're going to be able to build on that trust to start with some of the monitoring things and build into making some of those changes? Like with the 3 areas that I see other states doing are the feeding, the natural based urine or natural urine based lures, and then carcass movement are the 3 areas. Do you think you're going to be able to build from one, or do you think you'll have to start simultaneously with recommending some changes in both areas?
Levi Jaster. I think we're going to have to start with that education. In really the big picture thing that I see from this information is I look at how high those percentages of hunters that are unsure about all these options. How many, banning natural urine-based lures, almost 50% of the hunters weren't sure whether that was acceptable or unacceptable. So to me, that means we're going to have to provide them the information to, understand why that would be important to do. That's overall takeaway to me, is that this is identified, we've got a lot of communications and education on why these work, why these will help.
Sure.
Levi, this is Gerald. Do you think that's in part because an awful lot of our hunters don't use natural urine-based lures?
Levi Jaster, I don't know how many hunters use or don't use those actually in Kansas. I personally, as a deer hunter, don't. I just don't want to mess with them, and I can harvest deer easily enough without using them. I know hunters, though, that, they would not go sit in the woods to chase deer if they didn't have something like that out there.
At a minimum, you might want to include that question on a survey.
Yeah.
I think you'll find the numbers pretty small that use it, but I could be wrong. I'm like you. I don't like to mess with it. Are there other questions for Lauren? Go ahead.
Commissioner Silt, last thing is that I know it's a real tendency for us as human beings to see what we do right around ourselves and assume that everybody else does it the same way. And I think when people realize that in the Midwest, Kansas and Oklahoma are the only states that don't regulate to any extent the deer feeding, that all of the other states either say no to it or limit it to, so it's not done in CWD positive areas, that if we can educate people that, look, this is a good way to manage it by making some of these changes, and that not everyone allows this to happen. And that's whether it's carcass movement, lures, feeding, any of those things, that we've been pretty free here in Kansas, though it might be time to follow the lead that some of those other states have done and make some of those changes.
Levi Jaster, Emporia. I agree. And I think too that, this information is our starting point. It's our foundation to build from now. We have measured it. Now we can continue to measure how strongly we're continuing with that. And this is chronic wasting disease is an issue that has required hard choices. And I think when we give our hunters the information they need to understand why certain things are important, they're going to be willing to make that hard decision for the betterment of our deer herd. I really do. So.
Okay. Any other questions for Levi? All right. Well, let's move now to the workshop session, the Big Game 4 series regulations. We have at least one person who wants to discuss some permit issues. We may have more that want to discuss some of these things. I'm going to encourage that we go ahead and do that. I'm trying to decide which topic is best. I think when Levi finishes with the Big Game 4 series regulations would be a good time for some of the people in the audience to go ahead and discuss that. I see one person is here I've had a communication with. So Levi, do you want to go ahead and go into the Big Game 4 series regulations?
Levi Jaster, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, that's what we'll do. And that was kind of how I've got things set up even. So that works great. The first one is 115-4-2, which is general provisions. We're not proposing any changes to that. And so I'll jump right to our legal equipment and taking, because that's a little more where we've got some discussion today. And so this just specifies what equipment. We were asked to review a few different things, Blaze Pink, large caliber air guns, and the fire stick system produced by Federal. And so I am going to first let our expert in hunter education, Aaron Austin, talk a lot more about the Blaze Pink here. So if Aaron's available to start, I'll let him get going.
There we go. Aaron Austin, Education Section Chief. So thank you all for allowing me to address the Blaze Pink issue as an alternative color to Blaze Orange during the firearm, deer, and elk seasons. Just a quick history of Blaze Pink. In Wisconsin, that became the first state to allow Blaze Pink in 2016. Proponents framed it as a way to encourage more hunting participation among women. This idea raised controversy among hunters who thought that linking fashion with female hunter participation undermined true gender equality in the outdoors. For instance, the Women's Hunting and Sporting Association in Wisconsin objected to the bill, calling it demeaning. So since 2016, 9 other states have accepted the color to be used while hunting. So our current regulation pertaining to safety hunting clothing just reads that each individual hunting deer or elk during the firearms deer season or elk season is required to use the outer clothing of a bright orange color, commonly referred to as daylight orange, fluorescent orange, hunter orange, blaze orange, or safety orange. A hat with no less than 50% of the bright orange color that is visible from all directions, and a minimum of 100 square inches on the torso to be visible from the front, and 100 square inches to be visible from the back. It's approximately the size of a standard sheet of paper. So safety is our #1 concern. And with the addition of another color, when using the specific color to identify another hunter in the field, visibility is paramount. And so the color orange, the color should be easily seen and quickly recognizable by other hunters. And blaze orange has a strong and clear association with hunting and safety. Many articles of pink clothing that are found in the outdoor retail stores are typically of low intensity. They're pale in comparison, and they have a camo pattern, being misleading as a hunting safety clothing option. One thing that is produced, but it is not, there is not a lot of it, and this is what is considered blaze or fluorescent pink. But again, I will reiterate that there is not a lot of blaze pink that can be found in like large retail stores. There is an issue with color blindness in the US. It occurs in about 8% of men. Those that are red-green colorblind generally state that pink is the most difficult color to see, or that it blends in with the background. However, some red-green colorblind individuals cannot see orange either. The International Hunter Education Association states, no qualitative or quantitative research has been conducted to document the influence, positive or negative, of hunter safety color choice on the recruitment, retention, or reactivation of new or existing hunters. Therefore, IHEA USA recommends that hunter safety color requirements be established solely on the basis of detectability and visibility of a color that is in natural environments for human observers. So there's a lot to be said about the quick recognition of colors, for safety. And blaze orange is recognized as the international standard for identifying hunters in the field. So instead of introducing an alternative color for hunters, industry and retailers could continue efforts in improving the fit of hunting clothing items for women. In terms of recruiting more women in the field of hunting, there are 3 strategies that the department is already the department can be implementing to be more inclusive. We can support women's outdoor organizations that provide outdoor skills, hunting opportunities, and social support to new hunters. We can continue to promote programs such as Becoming an Outdoors Woman. We can encourage and recruit more female hunter education instructors and mentors. Lastly, there are many opportunities to wear pink, blaze pink, or any other fluorescent pink while hunting. Blaze orange is only required during the firearms, deer, and elk season. Hunters can currently wear pink under the required orange clothing. Small game hunters and upland bird hunters are not required to wear a specific blaze orange color in the field, and they could wear pink in that instance as well. And so with that, I'll take any questions or start discussion about this.
Commissioner Sill, thank you for looking into it on behalf of the constituent that I brought it forth on behalf of last time. And I appreciate that very much, the fact that you did give it some thought, and thank you very much.
Welcome.
I concur. So any other questions regarding pink? All right, Levi, do you want to go on?
Levi Jaster, yes, I will go on. And I want to thank Aaron for taking time to address that, as he's the expert on that and I am not. So the second item I've got is large caliber air guns. And legalizing them as hunting equipment for big game in Kansas. We have several concerns that, air gun manufacturers overall are not engaging in the American model of conservation, where they're paying or implementing the excise tax, the Pittman-Robertson Act that's so important for money that we utilize to fund our conservation. There are a few manufacturers that are voluntarily collecting that money and putting it into a fund, but it is not required. Adding this, we have had few constituents actually ask for it. It's mostly been manufacturers that have requested that we do this. The cost is pretty high to get started in it. So in that sense, it would be kind of mostly a novel way to harvest a deer, not necessarily something that a lot of people are going to be able to afford or choose. It's not appearing that it would open up much for additional opportunities in Kansas. Some states have had municipalities that do this, but so far the municipalities that we've been working with on deer control are addressing that currently through archery methods or other management hunts. And additionally, the regulations that would be required to do this would, are further complicating our regulations that we've been trying to eliminate. Effectively, we removed a lot of the caliber restrictions from firearms, while it's been a little bit, it's not been too long ago. And this basically would have to add all that back in as far as air guns. And with that, I would take questions about air guns.
This is Gerald there. It appears like the department is not recommending that we approve air guns.
Levi Jaster, we are not recommending them at this time.
Does anybody have any questions about that or anything regarding air guns? All right, you want to go on to the next item?
Yes, Levi Jaster. The next item is the federal fire stick, which was requested by the manufacturer, basically, to be included as legal muzzleloading equipment in Kansas. In our evaluation, the system does eliminate some of the handicaps of more traditional muzzleloading equipment, such as inconsistent powder charges or powder issues due to moisture or the elements. The system does require that the projectile be loaded through the muzzle, although the powder charge is loaded from the breech and can be easily reinserted or removed. And if shooters do actually utilize that, it would be an improvement in safety. But we were told that the ATF, in evaluating it, it is subject to the Wildlife Restoration Act, the Pittman-Robertson excise tax. And so, in general, with the fire stick, we have no biological reason to oppose or support inclusion of the fire stick in the legal muzzleloading equipment. We're willing to follow the commission's direction on that. We did do, Nadia, one of her staff posted a question on social media to hunters or to Kansans as to whether or not they were supportive of the fire stick and muzzleloader system equipment. There were comments both ways. The general consensus of them, though, leaned to the negative side, that they did not support including those. And so with that, I guess, questions.
Gerald, there, but it'd been easier for us if you would have made a recommendation, so we could blame you one way or the other. But having not done that, I don't know if I have a strong opinion one way or the other. I would feel better if it was a more widely distributed type of accelerant or a powder form. It's only a couple guns allowed to be done. I think that it probably is not a lot different than what we have now. I don't know if I have a strong opinion one way or the other. Does any other rest of the commission have any thoughts? Lauren, I see a question forming there.
You know, part of, I guess, what some of my thoughts is, like, particularly with the early deer season, the muzzleloader season, you know, what is the purpose of that? The Cabela's ad for the fire stick says, impervious to weather, reliable, consistent, ignition, accuracy, quick loading. These are all qualities that are not consistent with what was originally intended for the muzzleloader season. I would be supportive of allowing that, like, during the regular rifle season. But to me, I'm not sure that it moves us in a positive direction with our muzzleloader hunters as a whole, especially since this is not coming as a request from them, but from a manufacturer. And so I'm less inclined to want to pursue reg changes on behalf of manufacturers. So I
Any
guess I
oth-
have a question. It is, what's the purpose of that early muzzleloader season? And does this fit?
Since I shoot with an inline and a scope, I don't like to have too much talk about the primitive nature of the early muzzleloader season. Because in both cases, there are those that say I've gone too far away. So, I mean, you have a point. I mean, I don't think it's a bad system. I think it is probably slightly safer. It is more convenient. You still are using a single shot weapon with the projectile being loaded down the barrel. I don't have a strong feel one way or the other. Any other commissioners have any thoughts on this? It's going to die on the vine if we don't do something one way or the other.
The Commissioner, Gerald, I guess I don't feel strongly one way or the other, but Lauren makes a good point, and I know we've strayed quite a ways already from the early muzzleloader concept, but you know, I guess I feel more like she does that the more we can keep it from advancing even further, or at least think about the intent of the early season would be helpful. And then the point she made that I think is very good is the request didn't come from shooters, from Kansas sportsmen. It came from the manufacturers. So I don't feel strongly one way or the other either, but I would lean toward just letting it sit for a while.
Gary?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Gary, Commissioner Hazlett. I have hunted with the regular old Hawken muzzleloader, and it's an experience. And I enjoy it, and I've killed some deer with it. And I've watched it progress. And there is a safety issue when, you know, I don't know how many times I've talked to different ones. You know, if you go hunting with a muzzleloader, the old Hawken like we used, and you come home, you didn't kill anything, some of those people put those away in the closet with that load in there. And there's just some safety issues, but also the advancements they're making on this probably going to get here. You know, there's a lot of advancement from the muzzle loaders to, like you were saying, the way they're doing it now. So, you know, I think we need to look at it maybe further and see what takes a hold on that type of a weapon. That's my comment.
Is there any comment from the public out there?
Yes, Commissioner Lauber. We have Jared Regal. He would like to make a comment.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Lauren basically pointed out exactly what I was going to comment on, and I'm from Eastern Kansas, Shawnee. I've been, you know, rather new to hunting relative to my age, I guess, but I've lived here for 10 some years. But, you know, speaking with some of the folks that I hunt with and just reading general public opinion, as Levi pointed out on the Facebook page or Instagram posts, you know, the general opinion seemed to be against it. I think, you know, that as we don't need to debate what traditional muzzle loaders are, as I think we all have our own opinions there. But, you know, Federal and Traditions, who's the company that manufactures the rifle that takes the fire stick, you know, they advertise this as basically, quote, a fast, effortless loading and unloading with the same tight tolerances and quality controls as loaded ammunition. You know, in my opinion, and I think a lot of other people's opinions, if you want the advantages of hunting with a rifle, hunt during rifle season. If you want to hunt in a primitive season, learn the safety the safety rules and the regulations around the current muzzleloader season. But that's just one person's opinion. But I heard those sentiments kind of echoed in the general comments on the public media posts. So thank you very much.
Okay, is there any other comment from the public?
Yes, we also have Aaron Ogler. I'm unmuted now.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, my name is Aaron Olger. I've hunted Kansas for 15 or 20 years. I regularly hunt the muzzleloader season. I don't have one of these rifles. I'd be interested in getting one of the rifles with a fire stick product, but I need it to be legal in Kansas to do that. I understand all of the objections that have been voiced, but my opinion would be that if we're looking at going back to the original intent of a muzzleloader season, then I think we got to do away with 209 inlines. You got to do away with scopes. Anything else? I think if we're hunting with inlines today, and I hunt with a CVA Acura. There's not a lot of difference, it doesn't sound to me, between a CVA Acura and this new system, other than the safety, some of the safety improvements that it makes, which is beneficial to the state, to hunters, to the public, to everyone involved. So understanding what the objections are out there, but this sounds to me like a better system. And we've already made the decision to move ahead with technology in that original muzzleloader system, in the original muzzleloader season. So I would be in favor of giving Kansas hunters access to this product.
Okay. Any questions or does the commission have any more thoughts or questions? I'm not shutting off public comment either if there is more or any
We
questions.
have, oh, sorry, cut you off, but we have a John Zennel.
Sure.
Hi, thanks, Commission. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. I just crossed over the Kansas border here to chase some pheasants.
He did say he was a little spotty on.
So I am ammunition. I spoke to you guys before and went over our system. I didn't want to thank you guys for taking the time to review that. And again, just to reiterate.
I think we lost him. Sounds like me when I used to try to tune a banjo. So
I can email him afterwards and get him to email back.
That'll be fine.
We can provide it to the commissioner.
He's visited with us before, hasn't he?
I think so.
Yeah. I have very, very nice presentation and comments. I just, is there any other comments from the public? Any more from the commission?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mike Miller, I was just going to have Chris Tymoson chime in about, we had made an assumption at one time that this might be legal during the regular firearm season. And I think, Chris, I'd kind of like to hear your interpretation of whether or not it would be.
Okay, so the way our regulation structure is set up, archery would be the first listed equipment, and then archery equipment is valid during a muzzleloader season, and then muzzleloader equipment is valid during a rifle season, a firearm season. Because this does not meet the definition of a muzzleloader, and it's not a rifle, it would not be valid during our firearm season.
That complicates it. This isn't going away. I'm not all that fired up about it, but I think we've long since abandoned the uber primitive ways of hunting with the muzzleloader, I think this is going to hang around. If I don't hear a groundswell of encouragement from the commission or any commissioner who really wants to do it, I say we're going to let it sit here a while. And I think over time, the public will probably provide more encouragement. I'm a little disappointed that it can't be used during the regular firearm season, but I can see precisely what Chris is pointing out. So any other commissioner want to weigh in on this? Well, I'm going to propose that we don't do anything at this point. And we still have time as this moves forward into public hearing. Or will this be an issue in public hearing at a subsequent meeting? Can you answer that question, Levi or Chris?
Well, so as we prepare for the regulation process, I'm backdating those days that I have to know when we're going to vote on this, right? And so we'll vote in March. So we have one more workshop, but I will have formulated any regulatory changes before that January commission meeting. It's a little complex because this is a logical outgrowth of the discussion and people are placed on notice appropriately. So there could be an amendment at the commission meeting in March. But if you're saying you don't want to go forward today, that's the way it would have to be, is an amendment, not a proposal.
I'd like to have it as a potential amendment because I think an amendment probably reflects very lukewarm support, if any, from the commission. I'm sort of saying it's kind of one of those things where we're probably going to end up doing it one way or the other. And I think I'd like to have a little more time to kick it around and just not put a bullet in it right now, no pun intended. But I just don't know whether we want to go forward and say, I appreciate the department's honesty and Levi's honesty is they don't really care which one way or the other is not a good reason for or against. I'd like to be able to reflect on it one more time in some form or another. And I think the amendment might be the best way to do it. Do amendments give you heartburn, Chris?
They don't give me heartburn. They just make more work for the people who have to approve the regulation process. That's
What's the easiest way to keep this alive and think about it one more time?
I'm going to have to prepare a regulation change if you want to do this. And also it depends on, this makes it complex too, because if there are no other regulatory changes proposed in this regulation, we can't just publish a reg in anticipation of an amendment being offered because there's no change to offer an amendment to. You see what I'm saying?
And is there any commissioner who really wants to do this right now? If so, please speak up. Let's just leave it alone and let it die a natural death for now. We'll look at it next year. Is that okay with you, Levi?
Levi Jaster, yes, it is.
Commissioner Lauber, we did have one person raise their hand from the public. You want me to
Yes.
allow them? Okay.
Yeah, please, just sure.
Yep. This is Mark Tinsley. I'm going to unmute you now. Sure.
Mark?
Should be unmuted. Keep my co-host and then he can unmute himself. I clicked the link to ask him to unmute, but he hasn't unmuted.
Do you speak sign, Jason?
I do not. I just chatted with him to see if he.
There. Now can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Finally, I found the right button. I'm a member of the Kansas Muzzleloader Association, and we as a whole do not support this new type gun. We know that the inlines are out there, the modern ones. That's okay. We can't go backwards from there, but we don't support the new one. We want to say that, you know, if you want to do a muzzleloader season, learn how to use the equipment that's already there. It's safe if you know what you're doing. If you don't know, find somebody to teach you. That's the whole point of being a gun owner of any kind. So that's my stance on it.
All right. Well, thank you. I think the view that I had, which was it sort of die on the vine for this year, Mark's comments didn't change that opinion any. So, Levi, let's move on. Any other questions from the public or anybody? All right, let's move on to the next item, Levi.
Levi Jaster. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item is 115-4-6, which is the deer management units. We're recommending a change to Unit 19 boundary to clean up a spot where we don't actually complete the boundary. I've got a map to show. I will share. All right, so the place in question is that little red box up there in the far northeast corner of Unit 19. And just to kind of clarify it, the boundary is 70 Highway 73 there, or 92. And what happened was when reviewing that, US 73 runs south down into Kansas City.
How do you spell her last name?
And does not complete that last about half a mile along Kansas 92 to the state line. And so we're recommending that we adjust the language to include that a little bit to clear up that gap.
Okay.
So that's the recommendation, is to change the language to include that little half mile spot.
Any questions or any comments from the commission or public on that? All right, Levi, go to the next one.
All right, the next one is 115-4-13, which is the deer permits, descriptions, and restrictions. As of now, we're not recommending any changes to this, but this is might be this place that we could consider the antlerless question you brought up earlier, Mr. Chairman.
All right. do that.
Okay.
I have that, and then I have a question on landowner permit from a member of the public on the next section.
Okay. Levi Jasker. So the department was asked to review a proposal to allow non-residents who were unsuccessful in the draw for either sex permits to receive an antlerless only permit to potentially still come hunt that season. And we, in looking at this, we have some concerns that these antlerless permits are not very much desired or in demand by non-residents. They're not desiring to hunt antlerless deer in Kansas. A little bit of that is that non-residents hold about 1/3 of our doe permits, and yet they only acquire or account for about 20% of our doe harvest or antlerless deer harvest. And I think if non-residents wanted to come to Kansas to hunt antlerless deer, we would see that in that we provide all non-residents that draw on either sex permit, they have to buy a whitetail antlerless only permit along with that. And that was implemented in 2013. Prior to that, we only sold about 6,000 of those permits a year, a little over that. Adding that combo permit in increased the antlerless permits for non-residents by 4 times. And we only saw an increase in harvest of just about twice. So we added a whole lot more permits, and we've got 20-some thousand, almost 25 or just over 25,000 non-resident hunters last year, including 3,000, a little over 3,000 non-residents that hold hunt-owned land permits. And beyond those combo whitetail antlerless only permits, they've only bought 2,500 antlerless permits. And given that low demand, it doesn't really accomplish anything as far as deer management. It's not going to help us increase doe harvest where we need to. And we have tools that allow non-residents to do this. They can already come in January without an either sex permit to purchase or to hunt antlerless deer. And over the last 3 years, we had 12 permits in 2017, 2018, 12 permits. And in 2019, we had 13 of these permits purchased by non-residents that did not have an either sex permit already. And if landowners are needing to reduce doe numbers, we've already, all these non-residents already have permits for antlerless deer in their hands as far as the ones that draw. And many of them will be in units where they can purchase more up to the full, they could purchase 4 more to have the full 5 antlerless permits. We also have significant concerns from a law enforcement perspective about removing that requirement for having a either sex permit first. And so that's kind of where we're at right now.
Okay. Any questions for Levi? I've got a couple, 3 comments.
Levi, this is
Commissioners for, of how many non-resident buck doe permits did you sell? And how many of those tagged a doe?
Levi Jaster, we sold 25,000 last year, just a little over that. It was 25,037. And our harvest, I'm trying to look it up here. We had just under 10,000 does harvested by non-residents. And that was up almost 2,000 antlerless deer from the previous couple of years' averages.
Commissioner Spore again, how many non-filled tags? I guess I'm asking, do the non-residents even shoot does if they, obviously, if they didn't get their big buck, you know, I assume they had the opportunity to shoot a doe. And my question is if they did have the opportunity, did they take that opportunity is my question.
So unfilled antlerless tags for non-residents would be, where's my number? About 15,000 unfilled permits by non-residents. So, let's see. Yeah, it's about, you know, a little over 2/3 are not of the doe harvest is not occurring there that could.
Yeah, and that's just an assumption that did they come hunting, and if they did come hunting, did they pass on a doe? That was my only question. Thank you.
Commissioner Long here.
Oh,
go ahead.
Levi Jaster, also just to note to Commissioner Spore's comment, we do have a doe season in October, the pre-rut antlerless season. And that is, you know, when non-residents could be here hunting both, and maybe they're choosing to hunt antler deer primarily, but other participants from our postseason harvest survey, only 1.3% of the hunters that hunted during that pre-rut season were non-residents. And in general, of the non-residents that participate in January, only 1.6% of the January antlerless hunters are non-residents. So they are coming primarily when there is a season that allows the take of an antler deer only.
Commissioner Lauber here. A couple of things. I think the original thought about this was to enable someone to come if he or she were unsuccessful in getting a permit, and they would be able to go with their group and still be able to come and hunt because they'd have at least a doe permit. And initially, I thought, well, that seems to be a harmless and helpful request from an economic development standpoint. But as I have got more information on this, you know, we talk about deer management. Some of the outfitters want to talk about hunter management. And the point being that I have talked to some and have heard of conversations with many that they're uncomfortable and having, hypothetically, a group of 5 hunters all excited, and one of them has a doe only permit. And in the confusion and the excitement of seeing a big buck, $5 or $6 get shot and only 5 permits. I mean, I think that there is some concern, and I think the outfitters, while they don't want to step on a whole lot of toes, I think if you were to ask one candidly, they're going to express a pretty serious misgiving about having an antlerless permit without a buck permit in advance, because you're right, people do not come to Kansas to shoot an antlerless doe or an antlerless deer. So I know there are going to be people who are going to look at it from another perspective. I, at one point in time, thought that it was probably unnecessary. Over time, I've talked to several people who make a convincing argument, and I think, Secretary Lovelace, you've had people talk to you as well. And you might share some of your thoughts to where there's another side of this.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman Lauber. Let me try to get rid of my echo here. What I would say, we've had some good conversations. We had a conversation earlier this week with folks from the Kansas Livestock Association, and their comments were, and some of them may call in during our commission meeting today, were about, yeah, that question about if, I think the typical was a group is coming, one person doesn't draw. They obviously didn't use the group draw option, but one person didn't draw. They'd like that person to come and also be able to, you know, spend their money at their business and in Kansas. I have also had comments from outfitters, just like you have, about a concern and past practice. And some of those folks may call in today. As people have approached me, I've invited them to call in, because I know you commissioners, you hear from me all the time, but what you really need to hear from is you know, our constituents across the state who have a strong feeling about this. But I've heard a lot of concerns. Some outfitters say, I don't allow my folks to shoot does, and they had a whole list of reasons why they didn't, and they didn't feel like they were effective. That was an effective mechanism to control does. Most of them said, I don't have a problem with does. Some in the southeastern part of the state, where there are high doe numbers, have said, yeah, non-residents aren't the way I control does. I control does working with local residents in the late season, you know, and do that then. But there's a whole mix of feelings, and I found that those outfitters, whether or not they are a small operation and have been doing this a few years, or a big operation that's been doing it for more than a couple decades, they typically have strong feelings about this. So hopefully in the course of today's meeting, either now or maybe right after we come back from the dinner break, maybe they'll call in, Chairman.
You're on mute, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, yeah, you're still muted.
Is there, yeah, I'm sorry. Is there anybody else that wants to talk about this? And do we have comments from the public? Is there anybody from the public who'd like to weigh in? I'm guessing yes, but first from commissioners. Any more commissioners that want to say anything on this subject at this time? Okay, what about the public?
We have a Dean Clar from the public. Let me unmute you, Dean.
Welcome, Dean.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to include this on the agenda and look into it a little bit deeper. As you know, a majority of our constituents, or all of our constituents, are ranchers and landowners first. And this is kind of a way for them to ensure that they can create incentives to keep wildlife habitats and wildlife manage a part of their operation. And this had first started out just from inquiries from them. There may not be a huge demand for non-residents to come during the doe season in January or other parts of the year, but there could be the possibility for that during that first week of December. A farmer or rancher landowner who maybe just gives out a couple leases could tell their individual, I can't guarantee that you can shoot a buck every year, but I can at least guarantee you that you can come that same week. Every year you can mark it on your calendar and you'll be able to hunt here. It may just be able to only shoot a doe, but I can at least guarantee you that you can come. And then that kind of puts an incentive on both sides to put more focus on habitat management, wildlife management, and managing the property together. And I think that number is kind of hard to quantify when it's not an option during that same time of year. So that's just kind of our view on it and kind of the reason that we had brought it up. But we understand that there are other concerns out there and appreciate you all taking the time to look into it.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the public? Jason, has anybody raised their hand or called in or sent an email?
Let me double check the email real quick. Doesn't look like anybody has their hand raised or commented to me, and doesn't look like there's any email, so I think we're good.
Okay. Any other questions on this from the commission? I'm going to go ahead and take the chairman's prerogative. Mr. Kennedy Derek Kennedy is in the audience. I told him I didn't know how long it would take, so to make sure and check in maybe as early as 2:30, and he's been patient. He has a question he would like to talk about hunt your own land permits, and I realize that's in the next subject, but while we're talking from the public, I'd like to go ahead and have him at least express his concern that he has expressed to me.
Okay, I just asked him to unmute.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thank you for taking the time to visit with me. The concern I have is I have a 10-year-old daughter. We have property in Bourbon County, and I was in process of this year of trying to purchase her a hunting license. At that point in time, I was told in order for her to have a license, she would either have to be listed on the deed or she would have to enter the draw. Now she's 10. I can certainly understand that with a 17, 18, 19-year-old. But from a deed standpoint, you can't list a minor on a deed because they're not old enough to own property. From a draw standpoint, she's 10. We have a certain number of acres. You have to have at least 80 acres per member that hunts the property. She is an immediate family member. I would like to, because I had gotten conflicting information on this, I would like to bring this in front of the commission and let them know this is for people like my family, and we're just regular plain vanilla people that come to your fine state to hunt to provide a family atmosphere. We have a home there. We have 2 different farms, but not to be able to include my 10-year-old to hunt. It's just, we're a family of hunters. We all bow hunt. She shoots a crossbow. I just think I would appreciate some consideration on that for the future.
Okay. I have a question. There is a transferable landowner permit, but is that strictly for residents?
Mr. Chairman, Levi Jaster. There's not a transferable permit in Kansas, but I also have a clarifying question to Mr. Kennedy. Do you meet the 80-acre requirement minimum?
Yes, sir.
You do. Okay, Levi Jasker. There is a special hunt on land permit for.
I was asking, I meant to ask about.
And that sounds like she should qualify for because she is your child.
She is my child. Yes, sir, that's true. But here's our situation. It's myself. We own 180 acres. It's myself, my wife, and my 10-year-old child. And according to the licensing area, I would have to have 240 acres to allow my 10-year-old child to hunt. So if you were a family, say you were a family and you had 3 children, let's say 8, 10, and 12, you would have to have an additional 240 acres for your children to be able to hunt bucks. Now, during the special doe season, late season doe season in Unit 11, she can have a doe only permit and can hunt does. We had that clarified. But again, it was just, she is a minor. Every other state recognizes minors. Anyway, it's just, it's not like we're selling the farm. We love Kansas and we're going to stay there. But it's and next year what I will do is enter her into the draw. I just think that's a little much for a minor. And I understand that y'all have had some issues with people setting up trusts to try to, get in different members of the family and things like that. I certainly understand that. But what my situation is, and it was some, because there's a lot of people from Louisiana that own land in Kansas that come up there to hunt. And honestly, if it was just me, I wouldn't have had it. I do it for my children. So they can come up, and we hunt in Louisiana. But that was the stipulation. If I had an extra 80 acres for her to qualify, she could, or I could list her on the deed, which you can't because she's a minor. So they narrowed it down to 2 options. Either I put her in the draw or I list her on the deed, and that was it. And what I'm asking is for the commission to consider maybe including minor children of non-resident landowners to be included without the restriction of having an additional 80 acres per child.
All right, my suggestion and what I indicated to Derek when I talked to him is I would have staff review this. A lot of times, well-intentioned amendments to try to accommodate a good faith thing such as this create an issue where everybody games the system. And I wasn't sure exactly what the number of acres and ownership may be, nor did I promise we'd do anything other than I'd like for Levi to reflect on it with his deer group. And if you come up with a good idea, fine. I'm not sure what there would be, but you can. And I didn't mean to use the T word of transferable. I was thinking more of the hunt. What is it called? Hunt your own land.
Hunt your own land.
Yeah, the special.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, Chris Tymeson.
Yes.
So the special hunt your own land is not available to non-residents. It's available to non-resident children, but it's a landowner who lives in the state. So if Mr. Kennedy will give me a call tomorrow, I can talk about his situation. These are complex issues of land ownership and nuances in the statute. And we'll see if we can talk about it, not online in front of everybody. We can just have a conversation about it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. And
I left my email address with you guys when I registered. If you would like to email me, that way you're not blasting your telephone number across the world web.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Guys, Commissioner, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for taking time to speak with me. You guys have a great state. We enjoy every bit of it, and look forward to many, many more years of coming up there to hunt.
Okay, thank you, Derek.
Thank you, guys.
Is there any more discussion now on 115.411? Well, Levi, move on.
Levi Jaster. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That would bring us then to the 25 series, because that was the last thing in the 4 series. So if you're ready to continue with those, we'll do so. All right. So the 25 series does set some the dates for the seasons, except that we do handle the military seasons at a different in a different regulation. So this is just the general statewide seasons that are will be coming up, and it also sets the multiple permit limits. This year, the recommendation follows our traditional season structure, except with the January seasons, where we would be proposing a 9-day, a 16-day, or a 23-day antlerless season in January, depending on what unit. And so that will be dependent on this year's harvest, or our spotlight population surveys that are being completed right now as to what units fall within that. So the proposed season dates for the designated person youth or disability would be the 4th of September through September 12th. The early muzzleloader season would be September 13th through September 26th. The archery season also opens on September 13th and runs to December 31st. The pre-rut firearms whitetail antlerless only season would be October 9th through October 11th, which is Columbus Day weekend, as we've done for the last few years. The regular firearms season is December 1st through December 12th. That December 1st is that Wednesday following Thanksgiving, as we've held it traditionally for many years. And then the first extended whitetail antlerless only season would be January 1st through January 9th of 2022. The second season would be January 1st through January 16th of 2022. And the third extended season would be the January 1st through January 3rd of 2022. And then the extended archery season in which is DMU 19, would be January 24th through January 31st, 2022. Basically, this follows what we are doing this current season, with just the traditional adjustments for when days like the first Wednesday of after Thanksgiving, and when the first of the year occurs. So pretty much the standard that we've done this year overall.
Any questions for Levi on this? Okay. I think
that wraps up what I've got.
All right. Well, thank you. You've been on the stage here quite a while. Next up is Matt Peak. Are you around, Matt?
Yep, I'm here. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. Matt Peak, Emporia Research and Survey Office.
I have a question for you, Matt. Have you ever heard of a 20 litter set of coyote pups?
That's definitely on the high side, and our average litters are presumably well above the 2 to 3. Of course, ours is a harvested population, but anyway.
I'm going to let you know. I thought 20. Let's see if you'd ever heard of 20. I'm done. Go ahead.
Yeah, those types of numbers have been documented a time or two in Western states under extremely heavy control. But anyway, okay, I'll be talking about antelope KR 115.25.7, open season bag limit and permits. We don't have any changes to recommend for this regulation at this time, including season structure, bag limits, and permits are all expected to be standard. As such, unlimited archery permits will be allocated for both residents and non-residents. Firearm and muzzleloader permits will remain restricted to residents, with half assigned to landowner tenants and the remainder awarded to general residents. Firearm and muzzleloader permit allocations will be determined when we complete aerial surveys. We usually get these done in January, but with our agency pilot headed towards retirement, I think our biologists are going to try to give him one last antelope flight and get done in December this year. Our proposed season dates are provided in the briefing book, and those are standard again, so no changes recommended. I won't read over those dates. The 2020 season concluded here at the end of October. The archery season did, and we're in the process of obtaining harvest reports from as many hunters as we can. So we don't have anything to report on the season that just ended just yet, but we hope to have a harvest report completed by the next commission meeting. And so with that, I'll turn this back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, is there any questions from the commission for Matt? Any questions from the public? Then I guess you move on to elk.
Okay, Matt Peak, Emporia Research and Survey Office. This is elk open season bag limits and permits, KAR 115-25-8. Again, we don't have any changes to recommend to the elk regulation with season structure, bag limits, or permit types. The unit boundaries are defined in KAR 115-4-6B, and units 2 and 3 are open to hunting. And of course, the map of those units is found in the briefing book. The season dates both on and off Fort Riley are provided in your briefing book, but in the interest of time, again, I will not read over those. If you have specific questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Looking at your elk management units, the elk permits are only available to Kansas residents, and permit applications are separated into military and non-military applicants for the Unit 2 permit recommendations, and that's those that are limited and can be used on Fort Riley. Excuse me. And then in Unit 2, we also issue unlimited hunt-on land permits. And then in Unit 3, which is the larger unit encompassing most of the rest of the state, we allow those unlimited hunt-on land permits. We also allow unlimited general resident permits and unlimited landowner tenant permits in either sex or antlerless only for the elk. So those are the permits that are allowed. And with that, I'll turn this back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Matt. Chairman Lauber here. I've received 2 or 3 calls from people that feel like they've seen an elk along the side of the road alive. And I tried to recall the statistic is that how many different counties out of 105 counties have had elk harvested in them. Wasn't it like a fourth of our counties or more?
Yeah, so that was in the last 6 years. So, and maybe you've seen some of the recent elk photos that are floating around, but there was a bull elk in Smith County. There was one in Douglas County. So yeah, there are still animals out there moving around. To my knowledge, no, that neither of those were harvested or reported by people who were necessarily hunting them, but just by people who had seen them.
Right. Is there any questions on the elk regulations for Matt from the public or from the commission?
Mr. Chair, this is Brad Lovelace. I would comment that I believe probably a lot of those suspected elk sighting are just our huge Kansas deer.
Well, that very well could be. be pretty big deer. Any more comments or questions? Well, Matt, thank you very much. Now,
All right, thank you.
I have come to the end of the afternoon's agenda. So I'm going to propose that we recess and reconvene here at 6:30. Jason will probably be on at 20 after 6 for those that don't want to be late. And thank you very much, everybody, and we'll be back at 6:30. Thank you.